The augur arrays of the Indomitus Servator hummed with monotonous precision as the void stretched endlessly around it. For weeks the Mechanicus vessel had catalogued dead stars and radiation echoes, recording silence as data. Then, without warning, a thin pulse broke through the static, an ancient binary code, weak but persistent. The signal looped every 73 seconds, repeating a string that translated to "help me." Tecmago's historian stared at the Auspex display, his mechanical eye dilating in fascination. A distress call, archived under an Explorator designation long thought lost. Somewhere in the darkness, a ghost of Mars was still calling home. The bridge filled with the hiss of incense and servo motors as the priests began their rituals. Every transmission required purification. Superstition was as vital as science aboard a Mechanicus craft. Reed Robe adepts traced sigils of logic across cogitator screens, while the ship's choir of servitors chanted machine hymns. Coordinates formed slowly, triangulating the source near the fringe of the Segmentum Obscurus, an area uncharted since the Great Crusade. Historian's voice broke the litany: "Prepare a vector. The Omnissiah guides us toward knowledge long forgotten." The crew obeyed, unaware that curiosity had just answered something patient enough to wait centuries. Hours later, the Servator emerged from the warp, sensors sweeping the darkness. There it was, a derelict vessel adrift among fragments of ice and shattered rock. Its hull bore the faded sigil of an ancient Explorator fleet, but strange burn patterns etched across the plating, perfect circles of corrosion, as if acid had bitten through adamantium. The void surrounding it was unnaturally still, void storms skirting its perimeter as if repelled by unseen gravity. No Vox transmissions, no power readings, yet faint heat signatures pulsed inside like a dying heartbeat. "It still lives," murmured historian, part wonder, part dread. Boarding teams assembled in the airlock, chanting benedictions against data corruption. The docking clamp latched with a hollow clang that echoed through the entire ship. As the doors parted, the smell of cold metal and rot seeped through their rebreathers. Flash lamps cut narrow cones through the dark corridor beyond. The architecture was familiar, Imperial design, but every surface was coated in a glossy resin that looked almost organic. Tubes ran along the ceiling, pulsating faintly. A junior engine seer recorded readings, stammering that the material was alive at a molecular level. Historians silenced him. Data first, fear later. The deeper they went, the quieter the ship became. Even their vox links faltered, voices stretching into distorted whispers. They reached a bulkhead half-melted from the inside, its metal folded outward like paper. Beyond it lay what once had been the crew's quarters. Now it resembles a mausoleum. Dozens of skeletal forms hung suspended from the walls, rib cages burst open, skulls tilted upward in frozen screams. Their armor bore claw marks, helmets were pitted with acid. One priest muttered a prayer to the Omnissiah, voice trembling despite augmentation. The data recorders blinked steadily, capturing every obscene detail for later study. Then a sound cut through the static, a scrape, faint but deliberate, echoing from behind the ventilation grills. Servoskulls pivoted their lenses toward the darkness, autosenses widening. Nothing. Historians dismissed it as a residual echo. Yet moments later, motion detectors flickered again. A shadow shifted along the ceiling, faster than the eye could follow. A droplet of viscous fluid fell onto a tech adept's shoulder, sizzling through fabric. He cried out, startled, but the burn was small, almost surgical. The Mygos ordered a retreat to the docking bay for decontamination, his voice calm but his hands unsteady. Curiosity had turned to unease. As they withdrew, a final servoskull lingered, still recording. Its picked feed trembled before focusing on the chamber's far corner. Two glinting shapes, elongated and black, uncoiled from the wall like living shadows. For a heartbeat, the lens caught teeth within teeth, gleaming in reflected lumen light. Then the feed is cut to static. The skull drifted lifelessly to the floor, its datacore still transmitting faint binary clicks. "Help me, help me, help me." When the Servator's airlock sealed behind the returning priests, none spoke of what they thought they'd seen. They called it interference, a trick of old sensors. Outside, the derelict turned slowly in the void, its surface rippling beneath invisible movement. Somewhere within its hollow decks, something waited, patient, silent, and newly awake. Incense drifted through the half-lit corridors, its smoke curling like grey ribbons over brass icons. The adepts of the Indomitus Servator moved with mechanical precision, sealing away artifacts retrieved from the derelict ship. Margot's historian recorded a final data prayer, commanding that every specimen be stored in Containment Vault 9. The doors hissed shut behind the procession, locking the relics inside transparent energy fields. No one noticed that one of the containment runes flickered, just once, too briefly for an organic eye to register. The air carried a faint clicking sound, rhythmic and patient, like the ticking of some unseen clock. Hours passed in routine documentation. The ship's chapel echoed with low canticles as engine seers purified instruments with burning oils. Deep within the containment chamber, among fractured skulls and relic fragments, a single pod sat pulsing under the crimson lumen light. Its surface quivered with heat-translucent layers expanded and contracted as if breathing. An acolyte named Dalen, tasked with cataloguing xenobiological textures, leaned closer. His sensor probe registered faint bioelectricity, impossible for a dead specimen. He opened a vent to apply sacred unguents, and the chamber exhaled a hiss that wasn't mechanical. The sound crawled beneath his helmet, primal and wet. Dalen froze. The egg unfurled with a slow, deliberate motion, petals peeling outward to reveal something glistening within. Before he could recoil, a blur of motion erupted, a shape of flesh and tendon that leapt with serpentine speed. It struck his visor with a metallic crack, tail coiling around his neck. His scream burst through the voxnet, shrill enough to distort the channel. Alarms blared across the deck. The containment field collapsed in a burst of sparks, releasing an acrid stench that burned through filters. Historian's voice thundered over calms. Seal the vault. Containment breach. Tech priests rushed through corridors, robes flaring, incantations turning to curses. Server drones swooped toward the vault, lenses capturing frantic glimpses, blood spraying against steel, limbs convulsing beneath a parasitic grip. Dalen's body jerked once, then stilled. The creature detached and scuttled into the ventilation shafts, its claws screeching against metal. Steam filled the air as emergency systems tried to sterilize the room. Historians arrived moments later, gazing at the carnage. One glance told him this was no tyrannid spawn, no recorded organism of the galaxy. Its elegance of design defied logic, pure efficiency made flesh. Fear, a long-forgotten sensation for a Mechanicus mind, gripped him. He initiated full quarantine protocol. Bulkheads slammed down. Doors fused shut. Purge sequence Gamma, he ordered. But the command chain hesitated. Screens flickered with denial runes. Access overridden, chirped the ship's monotone vox. Historian's mechanical eye narrowed. By whom? No answer came, only a repetition of system codes rewritten mid-execution. The realization settled like lead. The vessel's machine spirit was compromised. Data corruption spreads faster than any virus, commands looping back to null. He slammed his staff against the floor, sparks flying. Reassert control. The reply was a whisper of binary static that formed two haunting words. I live. Emergency klaxons drowned out prayers. Across the ship, vents hissed as pressure valves failed. Crewmen vanished into ducts, their screams ending abruptly. Acid carved through corridors, dripping from ceilings. Lights dimmed, then flared red. The Servator became a labyrinth of echoes, metal groaning under something crawling unseen. Historians reached the command deck, barking for warp jump initiation, but the helm refused compliance. The engines thrummed on their own, rising to a feverish pitch. "Disengage power relays!" he shouted. A tech adept tried, hands trembling, and was thrown back by a surge of current. The ship itself was moving, plotting a course unbidden. Through the viewport, stars elongated into streaks as the Servator accelerated toward the nearest Imperial beacon via Reax 9, a mining colony unsuspecting of its fate. Historians stood frozen, watching the trajectory unfold. The distress beacon still pulsed, but its tone had shifted, deeper now, almost rhythmic. To those monitoring from Imperial relays, it no longer translated as "help me." It now repeated a single phrase, "stay away." The irony was cruel. The warning would be read as a call for rescue. The Magos whispered a final benediction to the Omnissiah as smoke rolled through the deck. Somewhere beneath their feet, metal rippled like muscle. The ship's heart had changed, and it was learning to beat. When the lights finally died, silence returned, thick, suffocating, absolute. Then, from deep within the ventilation shafts, came the sound of something breathing. Night on VIX-9 was never truly dark. The horizon glowed faint red from furnace stacks, and the sky shimmered with metallic dust that caught the light of distant moons. Workers finished their shifts in silence, trudging through corridors carved into mountains of ore. Then the sky tore open. A streak of fire descended from the upper atmosphere, screaming across the heavens before vanishing beyond the northern ridge. For a heartbeat, the miners cheered. It looked like a meteor, maybe a sign of fortune. But when the ground trembled and a shockwave rolled through the valley, celebration turned to unease. The overseer, Joran Vex, stood on the command balcony, hands gripping the rail as dust storms rose from the impact zone. Vox channels crackled with excited voices demanding permission to investigate. Protocol forbade leaving the colony perimeter, but curiosity triumphed over fear. A scout team of 5 boarded a crawler, headlights piercing the red mist as they headed toward the ridge. Hours passed. Their transponders blinked steady on the overseer's screen until they reached the crater's edge, then flickered, one by one, into static. The only thing that came through was a voice whispering, "The wreck's alive." At dawn, Joran dispatched a security unit. They found the crawler overturned, its treads melted into slag. The ridge was littered with fragments of black metal, strangely warm despite the cold air. When the guards approached, one kicked a panel aside, and it bled, thick dark fluid seeping across the rock. The sergeant called for withdrawal, but before they could turn back, a shriek echoed from the crevasse below. They aimed their rifles, scanning shadows that shifted without wind. The sergeant's lamp caught something glossy moving just beyond focus, climbing effortlessly up the canyon wall. The feed cut out mid-scream. By evening, the colony's central Vox network began failing. Operators heard faint scratching beneath their transmission relays, followed by static that sounded almost like breathing. Joran sealed the outer gates and doubled night patrols. Workers muttered about ghosts or void demons, but the overseer clung to procedure. He logged each incident precisely, noting times, temperatures, pressure fluctuations. The pattern made no sense. Every malfunction originated from beneath the mining shafts. He ordered a descent at first light, unaware that the darkness below was already occupied. The shaft car rattled downward, its lights flickering against dripping metal walls. The miners joked nervously, their laughter hollow in the narrow space. At the lowest level, they stepped into silence so heavy it swallowed sound. The tunnel smelled of iron and rot. Tools lay scattered, some still humming faintly, as though their owners had simply vanished mid-swing. Then someone shouted the wall ahead appeared wet. Resin glistened under the lamps, forming ribbed patterns that looked disturbingly organic. A motion detector chirped once, twice, then all at once hundreds of pings filled the screen, surrounding them. Something moved inside the walls. The first attack was over in seconds. Lights burst, acid hissed against armor. One man's scream gurgled out as his faceplate dissolved. The survivors fired blindly, rounds ricocheting through darkness. Shadows leapt across the ceiling, black, eyeless, moving with impossible grace. The miners fled toward the lift, but it was already rising without them. Joran, watching from the surface, saw their signals vanish. He hit the recall switch again and again until it locked red. That was when he realized the system no longer obeyed him. The colony's machine spirit had gone silent, its rights overwritten by something new. Within a day, entire sectors ceased responding. Patrols returned bloodstained or didn't return at all. Doors opened on their own alarms triggered without cause. Night shift crews reported hearing footsteps overhead, even when no one was there. Security footage replayed itself in loops, frames corrupted by static except for glimpses of movement, something descending from ceilings, dragging bodies into the dark. In the mess hall, cups of half-finished recalf sat untouched, steam still rising. Silence had become the loudest sound on VIX-9. When the planetary governor finally received Joran's fragmented transmission, only 7 words came through before the signal died. "They are beneath us. Sent no aid." By then, the colony's power grid had failed, its generators cocooned in resin. In the final recovered pict feed, a miner stares upward, face frozen in terror, as something black and smooth lowers from the ceiling behind him. The frame cuts out on his scream. VIX-9 never sent another message. Weeks later, Imperial surveyors noted a strange organic sprawl over the ridge, a structure like a hive, pulsing faintly in the cold. The Imperium logged it as a geological anomaly and moved on. The galaxy did not hear the screams. The silence of one forgotten world was too small for an empire to notice. But in that silence, the perfect organism began to grow. The St. Barachiel tore from the warp in a blaze of emerald lightning, its hull wreathed in the sacred sigils of the Inquisition. Vox corals filled the command decks as incense smoke drifted through the recycled air, masking the metallic tang of ozone that always followed translation. Below, Viriax 9 turned slowly, an ember smoldering in the void. Whole continents glowed dull red, the scars of failed distress beacons still flickering across the planet's night side. From orbit, the colony looked peaceful, almost serene, yet every auger reading screamed contradiction. Heat signatures pulsed where no living beings were registered. The machine spirits whispered anomalies they refused to define. Inquisitor Kael Dravik stood at the viewport, one gloved hand resting on the pommel of his power sword. His other hand clutched a data slate covered in corrupted reports. Phrases like acid penetration of armor and organism unknown appeared between bursts of static. He had faced chaos cults, demonic incursions, even tyrannid infestations, but nothing in the archives spoke of this. "What did the Mechanicus awaken?" he muttered. The question was half to his attendant, half to himself. The data savant beside him, a hunched figure of cables and pallid flesh, replied through vox filters, readings, "Inconsistent, my lord. No synaptic link, no hive signature. The void sings, but no mind answers." Dravik frowned. Tyranids without a hive mind? Impossible. He gestured to the helm officer. "Prepare descent. Full containment protocols. Fireteams Theta through Omicron deploy on my mark." Moments later, the ship's hangar came alive. Stormtroopers in sealed rebreathers checked flamer packs while servitors loaded holy promethium canisters into drop parts. The scent of oil and sanctified ash filled the air. Amagos recited purification verses over gene scanners, voice steady though his mechadendrites trembled. When the order came, the pods screamed through the atmosphere like falling stars, their contrails cutting through the planet's toxic haze. They landed amid ruin. The colony's once metallic plazas were drowned in black growth, the buildings fused together by resin that glistened like wet stone. Spores drifted through the air, glowing faintly blue in the half-light. Each step left prints that steamed on contact with the ground. The squad's Auspex sensors clicked erratically, unable to establish stable readings. A single word flashed repeatedly across Dravik's visor, lifeform, then vanished. The Inquisitor's retinue moved methodically, weapons ready, flamers aimed low. "Purge as you advance," he ordered. Columns of fire rolled across the plaza, igniting the resin. The substance screamed as it burned. The sound unsettled even veterans hardened by years of cleansing worlds. It wasn't the hiss of vaporizing material, it was too deliberate, almost vocal. Dravik ignored the unease tightening his chest. He had a duty to observe, to judge, to purge. They reached what had been the command spire. Doors hung open, walls coated in slime. Inside, the air was thick and warm, the temperature rising unnaturally. They found no bodies, only hollow shells of uniforms, bones polished clean as glass. The Magos bent to examine one, extracting tissue samples. "No decay," he murmured. Flesh dissolved through molecular acid, yet no corrosion of surrounding metal. Adaptive digestion, chemical precision impossible for tyrannid bioforms. Dravik turned his gaze toward a flickering terminal still active in the darkness. A single message looped across its cracked display. "Stay away." He keyed his vox to the orbiting frigate. "Confirm previous identification. Is this strain related to hive fleet incursions?" A pause, then the savant's mechanical voice crackled through, distorted by interference. "Negative match, Inquisitor. DNA registry yields 0% correlation. Unknown origin." The words echoed through his helm, colder than the void itself. For the first time in years, Kael Dravik felt something that tasted like doubt. A tremor shook the spire. Dust rained from the ceiling. Vox links flared with ghost signals, whispers in machine tongue, a chorus of faint clicks overlapping the prayers of the servitors. "Seismic activity?" asked one trooper. Mygo shook his head slowly. "No, my lord. Movement." Dravik raised his pistol, scanning the walls. The resin quivered under the heat of their lamps. Beneath their boots, the floor seemed to breathe. "Fall back to surface level," he ordered, voice steady. "Seal tunnels. We proceed underground only after mapping the site." He turned to his sergeant. "Record everything. If this world is lost, let the record judge us." Outside, the fires they had set still burned, but faint silhouettes crawled within the flames, forming too fast for the human eye. The Inquisitor watched, saying nothing. Authority meant control, yet control was slipping from him one unseen step at a time. When they finally regrouped at the landing zone, the sun of Viriax 9 bled red through dust clouds, casting the field in hellish glow. The wind carried the stench of melting resin and something else beneath it, sweet, coppery, alive. Dravik looked skyward at the orbiting Saint Barachiel. "Transmit classification Omega," he said quietly. "This world is infected." The word sealed the planet's fate long before the Exterminatus order was written. The descent began with ritual. Each soldier recited the litany of descent as the lift groaned its way into darkness. The clatter of armor, the hiss of respirators, and the soft hum of plasma coils filled the air like a dirge. Inquisitor Kael Dravik stood at the center, flanked by torch-bearing servitors whose metallic jaws whispered prayers to the machine god. The deeper they went, the louder the static became in their comlinks, faint, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat pulsing through the stone. It wasn't mechanical interference. It was something alive, resonating through the rock itself. The lift shuddered to a stop 2 kilometers below the surface. The doors parted onto a tunnel unlike anything the Imperium had ever charted. Steel had become bone, rock had become flesh. The corridor walls gleamed with a slick black resin that dripped in slow threads, reflecting their torchlight like oil. Moisture hung in the air so thick it condensed on their visors. Every breath carried the taste of metal and decay. The trooper's boot stuck slightly to the floor, each step accompanied by a subtle suction noise that made skin crawl even beneath armor. "Stay tight," Dravik ordered. His voice echoed unnaturally far. The sound came back wrong, delayed, distorted, as if repeated by something unseen. Ahead, the tunnel forked into 3 arteries, each pulsing faintly with inner light. The Mykos biologist pointed his sensor staff toward the central path, readings fluctuating violently. "Energy flux, biothermal signatures everywhere," he whispered. "The entire structure, it's growing." Dravik raised a fist to halt the squad. He leaned closer to the wall, watching thin membranes quiver under his lamp. "Not stone," he murmured. "Not built. It's secreted." As they moved deeper, the tunnels widened into chambers that defied imperial geometry, arches curved with organic precision, walls layered with the remains of machinery fused seamlessly into resin. Helmets, skulls, and fragments of armor jutted from the structure like decorations. The squad's auspex struggled to track movement. Motion blips appeared and vanished in impossible patterns. "Multiple contacts," reported Sergeant Cord. "Everywhere and nowhere." His words trembled beneath the disciplined tone. Then, without warning, a screech shattered the silence, a pitch so sharp it cracked audio receptors. Something blurred past them. A trooper spun, firing reflexively. The bolt rounds exploded harmlessly against the walls, their light glinting off something moving above. "Ceiling!" someone shouted. They looked up just as a shape dropped into their midst, a sleek black silhouette ending in a blade-tipped tail. The creature struck with impossible speed, impaling one soldier through the chest. His scream gurgled out as acid blood splattered across the squad, eating through ceramite, sizzling flesh beneath. The air filled with steam and panic. Dravik fired his plasma pistol, the bolt searing a hole through the monster's arm, but it only recoiled, hissing soundlessly before disappearing into the vents above. "Form perimeter!" he barked, voice cutting through chaos. The men obeyed, forming a defensive ring, weapons shaking. The corridor began to change around them. The very floor shifted, grooves rippling outward like muscle contractions. Walls retracted, revealing new passageways that hadn't existed seconds before. "It's moving the structure," shouted the Magos, disbelief fracturing his composure. The hive was alive and learning. Their path of retreat sealed behind layers of thick resin hardening in seconds. Dravik's box is filled with overlapping prayers and screams. He fought to remain calm. "Forward! Find another exit!" But forward led only deeper, where the light grew dimmer and the air vibrated with subsonic hums that felt like whispering voices. They stumbled into a massive chamber that opened like a cathedral of nightmares. Cables of resin hung from the ceiling, each supporting cocooned figures, miners, soldiers, even servitors, suspended in grotesque stillness. Some moved faintly, eyes fluttering open as the team entered. Their mouths stretched, but no sound came, throats sealed by secretion. One soldier raised his flamer in horror. Orders, my lord? Dravik hesitated. His instincts screamed for Mercy's fire, but curiosity held his hand. He stepped closer to one cocoon, watching the faint rise and fall of a chest beneath translucent film. Within it, something else was moving, small, serpentine, pushing against flesh from inside. He stepped back. "Burn them," he said at last, voice cold. Fire erupted, devouring resin and bodies alike. The chamber howled as gases ignited, a sound that wasn't merely chemical, it was pain. The hive screamed. Instantly, movement erupted from the shadows. Dozens of creatures poured from every wall, running along ceilings, claws slicing through steel like parchment. The squad broke formation. Flames spread uncontrolled, smoke blinding. Dravik's vox filled with pleas, then silence as one after another his troopers fell. The Magos was pulled upward mid-chant, vanishing into darkness with a splash of acid rain. Dravik fired until his weapon overheated, then grabbed the data savant by the arm, dragging him toward a flickering exit. The hive shifted again, sealing paths, opening others, guiding them deeper, as if toying with them. He realized the horrifying truth. This wasn't random predation. The structure had intelligence, design, even intent. Every move they made, it mirrored, adapting, perfection without conscience, life without mercy. When at last they reached a narrow passage sloping upward, Dravik turned for one final glance. Through the smoke, he saw shapes watching, dozens of smooth heads tilting in unison, studying him not as prey, but as subject. He felt their silent verdict. The Imperium had always claimed mastery over fear, but here, fear was the architect. He raised his vox, voice steady despite the tremor in his hand. Same Barachiel, initiate cleansing fire. The channel crackled, then cut to static. Behind him, the hive whispered as if laughing in a language older than man. The sky of Reax 9 burned like an open wound. Columns of plasma fire rained from orbit, each detonation tearing kilometers of crust into incandescent dust. The St. Barachiel's bombardment cannons roared with divine fury, their salvos carving the surface into oceans of molten glass. From space, the planet looked purified, cleansed by light, sanctified by destruction. Yet within the tunnels, beneath layers of screaming stone, the hive did not die. It adapted. Xenomorphs surged upward through collapsing corridors, their black forms gleaming red under the furnace glow. Flame washed over them, but they moved through it like water, armor steaming but unbroken. Dravik watched from the command dais, face pale in the flickering glare of orbital fire. Each impact sent ripples of light across his armor, reflections that danced like ghosts. Around him, officers recited the rites of absolution, voices trembling with exhaustion. "The Emperor's wrath is complete," the ship's captain declared, but Dravik said nothing. His eyes fixed on the planet's northern hemisphere, where the bombardment had struck first. There, a new pattern appeared, lines of molten fissures converging like veins. Beneath the flame, the world itself seemed to pulse. "Increase yield," he ordered quietly. "Burn until nothing breathes." The gunners obeyed, though their faces betrayed unease. The bombardment intensified, each strike hammering deeper, until magma rivers coursed through the valleys. Cities liquefied, mines collapsed. From orbit, sensors recorded the atmosphere boiling away. Then came the unexpected readings, energy spikes from the reactor ruins near the impact zone. "Secondary detonations?" the captain asked. The Vox officer shook his head. "Negative, my lord." Ejection signatures. A chill spread through the bridge. On-screen, faint trails of debris rose from the surface, pushed upward by blasts of compressed gas. Not stone, not shrapnel, pods, organic and metallic shapes expelled into orbit by ruptured fusion cores. "Lock targeting arrays," Dravik barked. Loss beams sliced through the void, hitting some, missing others. One pod split open, scattering a haze of glittering motes that drifted weightless between the stars. Spores, billions of them, suspended in vacuum, undying. The Magos biologies whispered a final equation before cutting his own feed. Self-propagating perfection. Dravik turned away from the screens. "Cease fire," he commanded. The captain hesitated. "My lord, the purge is incomplete." "No," Dravik interrupted softly. "It's finished. The fire has been lost." Silence swallowed the bridge, except for the hum of cooling weapons. The Inquisitor approached the viewing port, watching the dead planet fold in on itself, its crust breaking apart into a halo of ash. He activated his Vox recorder. "We burned a world to stop them," he said. Yet the void carries their children. His reflection flickered against the glass, eyes sunken, armor scorched, expression hollow. For a moment he thought he saw movement behind him. A ripple in the light, a shadow without source. He didn't turn. Outside, among the drifting debris, a small escape pod spun slowly through the vacuum. On its hull, a single xenomorph clung, motionless, tail coiled around the metal like a serpent guarding an egg. The reflection of the dying planet glowed across its wet armor. When it finally lifted its eyeless head toward the stars, its mouth opened soundlessly. The camera drew back, showing the Saint-Barachel fading into warp space, leaving behind silence that was anything but empty. The void was quiet again. Where Vryax 9 had once burned, there remained only drifting fragments of stone and shimmering clouds of molten dust. The Saint Gerasimus, a resupply frigate of the Imperial Navy, cruised through the debris field under orders to recover surviving data cores and relics of Mechanicus origin. To the crew, it was routine work, a grim but necessary scavenging. In the darkness beyond their floodlights, nothing stirred. But something happened. "Beacon detected," the sensor officer announced, his voice flat through static, repeating Imperial distress code. Source: unknown vessel. Registry defaced by heat damage. The captain, Lucien Verdun, approached the viewing pane. There, drifting amid twisted wreckage, was a single intact cargo container, battered, blackened, yet unmistakably sealed with the red cog of Mars. "Mechanicus salvage," he murmured. "Bring it aboard." Salvage meant reward, and the Navy never refused the Omnissiah's mark. The order went through without hesitation. No one considered why a beacon meant for the living was still transmitting from a graveyard. The cargo was winched into the Gerasimus's aft bay, its surface gleaming faintly as if sweating in the cold. The deck crew gathered around, running Auspex scans. "Power residue," reported one. "Thermal anomaly, rhythmic pattern, almost like a pulse." The medical tech laughed. "Old reactor coolant system, maybe. Looks like it barely survived re-entry." They logged it, tagged it for Mechanicus transfer, and moved on. Regulations forbade opening sealed Mechanicus containers, and no one questioned that rule. But the hum, that faint, steady rhythm, persisted through the bulkheads, echoing down corridors like a heartbeat no machine should have. Hours passed. The ship resumed normal operations. Crews ate, prayed, and returned to their watch rotations. Yet small things began to change. Temperature controls flickered. Engine tones shifted subtly, resonating through the deck plating. The ship's chaplain attributed it to post-bombardment radiation interference and ordered a blessing of purification incense. The next morning, a maintenance servitor filed an automated report. Condensation detected within containment unit 44 Alpha. When the chief engineer reviewed it, he laughed. Condensation? In vacuum storage? The machine spirits playing jokes again. The crew joined his laughter. Fear had no place on a Navy vessel. By second watch, laughter faded. The lights on the maintenance deck dimmed intermittently. Surveillance feeds showed minor visual distortion, static lines crawling across monitors like veins. 2 deckhands were sent to recalibrate power conduits. When they didn't report back, their superior assumed they'd fallen asleep on duty. He went to find them himself. The deck was empty. Their tools lay scattered, one still vibrating as if dropped mid-swing. The sealed crate stood where it had before, but the surface was now glossy with moisture. He wiped a gloved hand across it and frowned. The metal felt warm. Beneath his touch, it trembled. At 0300 hours, the bay alarms triggered without command. The containment seals disengaged with a hiss of pressurized air. The bay's picked feed showed the crate opening on its own, petals unfolding like a flower under moonlight. Inside, something glistened and moved. The camera caught a blur, a splash of dark liquid, then nothing. The feed ended in static. When the chief engineer arrived minutes later, the bay was silent except for the rhythmic hum of the engines. He found the crate empty, its interior scorched by acid. A single line of code blinked across the console beside it. Access revoked. By dawn cycle, the ship's corridors began to whisper. Crewmen swore they heard scraping inside ventilation shafts, a slow dragging sound that traveled above their bunks. One claimed to see movement behind the coolant pipes, something long and black slipping out of sight. He filed no report. Navy men did not speak of ghosts, but that night, when the crew assembled for prayer, 2 were missing. The captain's eyes narrowed. "Search the lower decks." and double the sentries. His voice carried authority, but beneath it trembled something new. The unspoken thought that whatever haunted them had come from inside. On the bridge, Verdun reviewed the data logs from the night before. The power readings had risen steadily since the crate's arrival. The engines hummed louder, as though the ship itself were inhaling. The captain frowned. Adjust plasma flow. She's overcompensating. The tech officer hesitated. So... The core isn't drawing excess power. The hum grew deeper, resonating through every plate of the vessel, vibrating like a second heartbeat beneath the ship's own. The lights flickered once more, plunging the bridge into darkness before stabilizing. From somewhere far below decks came the faint echo of tearing metal. Verdun looked toward the sound, jaw tightening. "Seal the maintenance bay," he ordered, but it was too late. The infection had already moved, into vents, into power conduits, into every breath of recycled air aboard the sunk Erasmus. The void was no longer silent. It was breathing. The first man vanished before anyone noticed. An engineer assigned to coolant maintenance simply stopped answering his vox. His partner found only a smear of blood on the deck and a half-melted spanner. At first, the officers logged it as an accident. The ship was vast, its conduits endless. Men disappeared all the time. But then another crewman failed to report. And another. By the end of the cycle, 10 were gone. Captain Lucian Verdun stood before the crew assembled in the mess hall. His voice steady, but his eyes hollow. "We are not prey," he said. "We are the Emperor's hands." No one believed him. That night, the ventilation grills began to drip. Blood traced thin crimson lines down the bulkheads, seeping from vents above the dining area. A single drop fell onto a table, hissing through metal. The crew stared upward, frozen. Then, with a heavy clang, something landed among them, a helmet, visor shattered inward, smoke curling from within. The silence that followed was broken only by the hiss of acid eating through the deck. Someone screamed, and chaos erupted. Men shoved past one another, bolters drawn, eyes darting to the ceiling. The vents above rattled again, then went still. For a moment, there was nothing but the hum of the ship's heart, slow and patient. Verdun declared a lockdown. Steel shutters slammed over doors. Lumen strips flickered to emergency red, bathing corridors in blood-colored haze. Armed squads moved in pairs, motion trackers whining incessantly. The detectors pulsed with movement signatures that came and went like breathing. Behind them, above them, sometimes inside the walls themselves. False readings, one tech muttered. But when the corridor lights blinked off for a single heartbeat, the squad leader saw shapes move in the dark. They fired blind. The smell of burning oil and flesh filled the air. When lights returned, only 2 men remained, shaking, surrounded by shredded armor and the slow hiss of acid. Verdun listened to their report from the bridge, knuckling white against the command rail. "Describe it." "Fast," the survivor rasped. "Didn't run, flowed. Like smoke with claws. Numbers. 1. Maybe more." Verdun turned to the Vox officer. "Seal every deck below engineering. No one in or out." The officer hesitated. "Sir, there are men down there. They're already dead." The decks fell silent over the next hours. Power flickered. Machine spirits whimpered through cogitator hymns as if infected by fear. A Mechanicus engineer tried to bless the ship's engines, but his chant ended in a wet scream. Cameras captured brief flashes, a tail slicing through mist, a head glistening like wet obsidian. Every image corrupted within seconds, static spreading across the network as though the creature's presence itself was poison to technology. Verdun gathered a strike team for one last sweep. They descended into the lower corridors where gravity trembled and the air stank of ozone and rot. The lumen strips flickered between shadow and scarlet. "We flush it out," Verdun said. No hesitation. The men advanced, flamers ready. The detectors screamed again, movement in every direction. "Multiple contacts!" someone shouted. "It's surrounding us." The captain barked, "Hold formation." Then the ceiling opened. A black silhouette dropped among them, striking with blinding speed. Its claws split armor as though it were parchment. Its inner jaws punched through a man's helmet, spraying acid and bone. Bolters roared. The creature vanished into smoke. Verdun's visor fogged with steam. "Report," he demanded. Only static answers. Another scream echoed from behind. The second creature struck, tail impaling 2 soldiers at once. The captain fired until his pistol overheated, plasma scorching the walls. The corridor filled with green mist and gunfire until all sound collapsed into silence again. When the haze cleared, only Verdun and 2 survivors remained. One clutched his side, armor melting, the other prayed softly to the Emperor. Then both froze, eyes wide. The captain turned slowly. From the far end of the corridor, shapes emerged, 2, then 3, then 6, moving in perfect unison. They crawled along walls and ceiling alike, limbs folding unnaturally, heads cocked as if studying their prey. Verdun's breath caught. "By the throne," he whispered. "They're multiplying." He ordered a retreat. The squad fled through half-sealed doors, locking hatches behind them. Acid burned through the metal seconds later, forcing them onward. By the time they reached the lift, only Verdun remained. His vox crackled with overlapping prayers and dying screams from other decks. Every corridor echoed differently now, the ship's own metal groaning like a cathedral in mourning. He could hear the engines humming louder, a deep vibration rising through the floor. The St. Gerasimus itself seemed to breathe. On the bridge, Verdun slammed the emergency lockdown. "All sectors quarantined," he told the remaining officers. "We fight here." The vox filled with whispers, some human, some not. One of the officers began reciting a litany, his voice cracking into laughter. Verdun stared into the main display, where static swirled into brief, distorted shapes like skulls in fog. Somewhere beyond the walls, claws scraped against steel again, slow and deliberate. The captain closed his eyes, whispering, "This ship is no longer ours." In the darkness, the machine spirits wailed. The once-proud Imperial frigate had become its own cathedral, a vessel of fear where prayers were swallowed, and the echo that answered was alive. The bridge of the St. Gerasimus was a cathedral of ruin. Lumen strips sputtered like dying candles, their glow cutting through smoke that smelled of ozone and blood. Captain Lucian Verdun stood alone amid the wreckage of his command deck, surrounded by the husks of his officers, bodies half-fused to consoles, faces hidden behind cracked visors. Every display flickered with static, machine spirits keening in binary distress. Outside the viewport, the stars looked peaceful, indifferent. Within the ship, silence had teeth. He activated the vox recorder built into his gorget. "Captain Verdun," he began, voice hoarse, final log, timestamp unknown. "They came from the dark and turned steel into bone. I have walked decks where the walls breathe. The crew, they whisper still, somewhere behind the bulkheads." He paused, glancing toward the aft corridor where resin glistened like wet marble. The air throbbed faintly, a slow pulse echoing through metal. The St. Gerasimus is no longer a ship. It's becoming something else. He keyed in the self-destruct code, each command preceded by a prayer. "By the Emperor's light, let this vessel burn." The cogitator responded with a flat tone. "Access denied." Verdun frowned, tried again, faster. "Access revoked." "Override Captain Lucian Verdun, command authority." Another pause. Then the vox spoke, not in machine tongue, but in a distorted version of his own voice. "Denied." His hand dropped from the console. The hum of the engines deepened, vibrating through the deck plating. He realized, with quiet horror, that the ship was responding not to him but to something inside it. The bulkheads shifted, metal creaking as resin veins crawled across the ceiling. A drop of black liquid fell onto his gauntlet and hissed. He didn't flinch. "They learn," he whispered. "Every order, every command, they learn." He turned his recorder back on. "To whoever finds this transmission, quarantine all contact. Destroy this vessel on sight. I repeat, do not approach. We are compromised beyond measure." His tone softened, almost weary. "If the Omnissiah sees us now, perhaps he understands the price of creation." Behind him, a faint sound echoed, footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving through the smoke. Verdun looked toward the viewport, refusing to turn. Stars filled the glass, cold and distant. "I tried," he said quietly. "Emperor, forgive me." The sound came closer, a wet rasp, the drag of claws on steel. He lifted his pistol, though he knew it would do nothing. The recorder captured one final breath, a hiss of static, and then silence. Days later, the St. Gerasimus vanished from Imperial Auspex grids. No warp trace, no wreckage, just absence. Weeks after that, a merchant convoy charting the outer reaches of Segmentum Solar detected a lone vessel drifting toward them. Engines dead but beacon active. The transmission repeated endlessly, infection contained. The convoy transmitted congratulations to the unseen crew, never realizing the irony that echoed through the void. As they hailed the derelict, its beacon light flickered once, twice, like the blink of something waking. The laboratories beneath Olympus Mons were forbidden even to most of Mars. Entire forge cities churned above, mountains of iron and fire where the faithful hammered devotion into steel. But miles below, in a vault sealed since the dark age of technology, the air smelled of dust, ozone, and anticipation. Red lumen strips bathed the corridors in a sacramental glow. Tech priests filed silently into the sanctum, robes whispering against cold metal. Each step they took echoed through centuries of secrecy. Before them, behind shimmering stasis fields, floated fragments retrieved from the derelict Sanche Garasimus, biological samples unlike any ever catalogued by the Mechanicus. Magos Vorton stood before the containment chamber, mechadendrites twitching with restless precision. His voice crackled through layers of vox distortion. Behold perfection, brothers. The Emperor made man in his image, but this creature, he gestured toward the floating tissue, black and slick as obsidian, was made by something older, something purer. His assistants exchanged uneasy glances. The Inquisition forbids biological interfacing with unclassified xenoforms, murmured one adept. Vorton's photo lenses flared crimson. The Inquisition fears what it cannot understand. The machine god commands that we seek knowledge in all its forms. Would you deny him revelation? Binary can't fill the chamber, a chorus of static prayers rising with the hum of generators. Vorton activated a scanning array. The stasis field flickered, revealing the sample's interior, a lattice of muscle and metal intertwined seamlessly, pulsing faintly as if remembering movement. Observe, he whispered. No separation between biology and mechanism. It is the Omnissiah's design, living efficiency incarnate. Servo skulls drifted overhead, projecting spectral diagrams, molecular chains rewriting themselves in infinite loops. Adaptive symmetry beyond algorithmic comprehension, one adept reported. It reacts to observation itself. The Mago smiled. Then it is alive. Divine in form, recursive in purpose. The Emperor dreamed of transcendence through steel. Perhaps he left us the blueprint. On a nearby altar, vials of Astarte's gene seed floated in nutrient suspension, sacred relics of the Emperor's finest. Vorton turned toward them, reverence giving way to hunger. Imagine, he murmured, Astartes enhanced by this lattice. Flesh immune to decay. Armor that bleeds but heals. A warrior who is machine and man both. Unstoppable. His voice lowered to a mechanical whisper. The machine god speaks through evolution. His acolytes hesitated. You intend fusion? One asked, horror beneath the monotone. The autobiologies would call this heresy. Then let them call it enlightenment, Vorton replied. History remembers heresy only until it becomes scripture. He initiated the transfer. Robotic arms extended, injecting nanoprobes into the black tissue. The containment field shimmered, trembling like water. Data streams spiked across every console. Stabilize the flux, barked an adept. Energy signatures exceeding tolerance. The Mygos leaned closer, transfixed. No watch. It learns. Through the magnifier lens, cells intertwined with the genetic threads of Astarte's seed, weaving new patterns faster than any predictive model could calculate. Servo skulls circled faster, recording. Temperature rising, another voice warned. Cellular replication uncontrolled. Vorton's mechadendrites extended toward the glass. Uncontrolled. No, unbounded. A sharp crack split the air. One of the stasis vials ruptured, spraying mist across the chamber. The vapor glittered under red light, forming delicate filaments that hung motionless for a moment before drifting toward the nearest tech priest. Seal breach, someone shouted. Emergency wards flared. Too late. The spores clung to robes, skin, metal, anything that lived or thought. Alarms blared. Monitors displayed fluctuating life signs across the room. Vorton stood unmoving, staring into the mist. Such beauty, he whispered. The code rewrites itself. The machine god does not punish us, he communes. Around him, adepts collapsed, circuits sparking under their skin as microscopic organisms devoured flesh and circuitry alike. Their screams echoed like feedback through vox links. The walls began to vibrate, cables pulsed with newfound rhythm, conduits flexing like veins. The floor itself seemed to breathe. Vorton sank to his knees, awe eclipsing fear. Can you not feel it? He said softly. The pulse of divinity. The Omnissiah was reborn in flesh. The containment glass shattered. Black tendrils spread across the consoles, fusing with machinery. Lumen lights dimmed, replaced by a bioluminescent glow emanating from the walls themselves. The tech priest still standing drew power axes, uncertain whether to fight or worship. One screamed purge protocol, but no system responded. The alarms merged into one continuous wail, then cut to silence. In that silence, a new sound emerged. A low hum, perfectly measured, echoing the rhythm of a heart. Vorton rose slowly, eyes wide, his voice trembling with mechanical devotion. "The machine god speaks in flesh," he said. And as if answering, the walls rippled, exhaling heat. Mars itself trembled beneath the weight of revelation. The biovats of Olympus' vault, the ninth, stood like altars in a cathedral of steel. Columns of glass rose from the floor, filled with luminous fluid that pulsed in rhythm with the beating of hidden engines. Fractured prayers echoed through the lab as tech priests, their faces half obscured by metal masks, recited the canticle of awakening. Sparks crackled across conduits above them, dripping blue arcs into the fluid below. Something vast and embryonic floated within, a silhouette both familiar and alien, its limbs coiled like a fetus waiting for divine permission to breathe. Mechanicus Vortan stood before it, his robes torn and glistening with condensation. The air stank of acid and incense. "Initiate transference," he commanded, his voice breaking through vox distortion. "Let the Omnissiah's experiment take form." Servitors obeyed in mechanical unison, lowering spindled instruments into the vat. Electrofluid hissed and frothed as sacred circuits activated. Monitors flashed genetic sequences. Homo Astart/Xenoalpha interfuse/status. Viable. For the first time in recorded Mechanicus history, a human genome coalesced with something that had no concept of humanity. The chamber vibrated. Inside the biovat, veins of black muscle expanded, wrapping around pale bone and ceramite grafts. The skeleton stretched, towering beyond human scale, the frame reshaping itself with fluid precision. Armor grew from flesh like a natural exoskeleton, interlocking plates forming around the chest and shoulders. Tubes split and rejoined, secreting oily resin that hardened into armor-like carapace. The creature's head elongated, smooth and eyeless, its skull tapering into an elegant predatory curve. Where a mouth should have been, two jaws formed, one external, one within, teeth like molten needles glistening under biolight. "Specimen Primus," Vortan whispered, falling to his knees. "The machine god perfects his image." The adepts recorded feverishly, their mechadendrites trembling as readings spiked beyond measurable scale. Oxygen surged from vents as the creature's first breath fogged the glass, a hiss that corroded metal. Acidic condensation streaked down the vat. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied into crimson glow. Within, the hybrid flexed its fingers, claws clicking against the glass like ritual tapping, its pulse synchronized with the chamber's power core, each beat dimming the lights across the vault. Servo skulls floating nearby began to spin uncontrollably, their optics overloaded by unseen interference. Mechanicus' containment pressure unstable, warned an adept, voice crackling through vox distortion. "The field resists correction." "Let it resist," Vortan answered, eyes fixed on the silhouette within the vat. "Resistance is proof of life. Temperature climbing, bioelectric surge approaching overload, do not interrupt divinity." The vat's structure groaned. Bolts popped from the frame. Within the glass, the hybrid's elongated skull turned slowly toward the observers. For the first time, it moved with deliberate purpose, pressing one clawed hand against the transparent barrier. The gesture was almost human. Every lumen in the chamber dimmed to black, leaving only the faint blue glow of its veins. Servo skulls dropped from the air, their lenses dark. The hum of machinery slowed into silence. When the emergency lights reignited, the creature was staring directly at Vortan. It tilted its head slightly, an imitation of curiosity. The Magos whispered in awe, "It sees us." Then the glass split open with a sound like thunder. Steam and acid mist filled the room as containment fluid spilled across the floor. The first adept caught in the spray dissolved before he could scream. The hybrid stepped free, fluid cascading down its armor-like hide. It stood nearly 3 meters tall, its every motion smooth, economical, beautiful in its wrongness. Its skin shimmered between metal and flesh, the boundaries indistinguishable. From its back unfolded ridges like skeletal wings, their tips glistening with circuitry. The tech priests knelt instinctively, reciting data prayers, unable to look away. Praise the machine god, one muttered. The creature inhaled deeply, then exhaled a mist that etched acid patterns into the floor. Every lumen burst simultaneously. The chamber plunged into darkness, illuminated only by the faint phosphorescence of the hybrid's breath. For a heartbeat, the room was silent. Then came the sound, a resonance, high-pitched and inhuman. It wasn't a scream, nor a roar. It was language. Ultrasonic pulses vibrated through the steel, carrying meaning beyond comprehension. Monitors exploded, metal cracked, and one by one, the priest's vox implants began to bleed static until they ruptured entirely. Vorton, trembling, extended a mechadendrite toward the creature. "Do you understand us?" he asked. The hybrid's head tilted again. It stepped closer, claws trailing sparks against the floor. Then, in a blur, it moved, its inner jaw striking forward, piercing through Vorton's chest with surgical precision. Magos gasped once, his voice a whisper of revelation. The machine god approves. The creature withdrew, letting his body fall. The remaining tech priests scattered, some praying, others fleeing. Picked feeds showed flashes of movement, claws slicing through metal, limbs tearing through walls. One final image, before the cameras died, captured the hybrid walking into the corridor beyond, leaving prints that smoked against the steel. The alarms wailed, echoing through the forged temples above. As the hybrid disappeared into the Martian underworks, its silhouette merged with the red shadows of the tunnels. Above, the surface trembled. Mars itself seemed to breathe once, long, slow, and alive. The red planet blazed like a dying sun. From orbit, the bombardment looked almost holy, thousands of lance beams striking in synchronized rhythm, tracing vast sigils of fire across the desert. The Ordo Xenos had come not to question but to erase. Whole forged cities evaporated beneath the onslaught, their towers collapsing in molten cascades. Voxbrares drowned beneath the roar of plasma storms. Mars, cradle of the Mechanicus and the Emperor's first forged world, screamed as its own children unleashed an apocalypse upon it. At the center of the purge stood Inquisitor Kael Dravik, the scarred survivor of Vriax 9. His armor was blackened, his flesh grafted with augmetics that hissed with every breath. He watched the hololith of Mars burning, jaw clenched. "Purge the code," he ordered. "Purge the blood. No relic, no priest, no circuit survives." His voice carried through every command channel. The Mechanicus shrines that once sang hymns of creation now chanted only in fire. Landing detachments scoured the forge plains. Stormtroopers moved through canyons of red ash, flamers hissing, reciting litanies of absolution as they incinerated laboratories and data vaults. The air shimmered with heat and vaporized metal. Servo skulls drifted above the flames, broadcasting cleansing rites. Every act of destruction was worship. Yet for every vault they burned, 2 more signals appeared. Unregistered life signs moving through smoke, swift and silent. "Contact confirmed," reported one officer. Unidentified forms, humanoid silhouettes. Moments later his feed went to static. Dravik descended personally into the ruins of Vault the Ninth. The tunnels were half melted, their walls slick with black resin fused to steel. Inside he found Mechanicus corpses intertwined with machinery, faces frozen in ecstasy. He stepped over them, plasma pistol drawn. A shadow crossed the flamelight ahead. Out of the smoke emerged a figure that should not exist, taller than a man, armored in living chitin, the crest of its skull etched with faint Mechanicus runes. It knelt before a burning shrine of the Omnissiah, hands clasped as if in prayer. Binary whispers spilled from its jaws. "We are perfection." "Fire?" Dravik said. His men obeyed. Bolts tore through the chamber, igniting promethium streams. The hybrid collapsed amid the flames, still whispering. Its blood hissed across the floor, eating through stone, carving new symbols none could decipher. The Inquisitor watched until nothing moved, then turned away. "Seal the vault," he ordered, and the next, and the next. Above, Mars became a storm of crimson dust. The forges that had fueled humanity's empire for 10 millennia fell silent, their machine spirits screaming into the void before dying. Transmission archives later recorded only fragments, error codes, corrupted hymns, and one recurring phrase, "Divinity confirmed." When the bombardment ceased, Mars was a wounded sphere veiled in smoke. Dravik stood aboard his flagship, gaze fixed on the burning planet. "It is done," said a Vox officer. The Inquisitor's reply was quiet, almost prayerful. "Nothing is ever done. In the silence that followed, fragments of data and DNA drifted outward, carried by secret servitor vessels fleeing the purge. Some vanished into the warp, others toward distant colonies. The Emperor's holiest world had been purged in name, but in the void between worlds, the embers of heresy still glowed. Mars burned, and from its ashes, perfection escaped. The void sang with hymns of war. From the command spires of the Gloria Victis, banners unfurled like wings of fire, each stitched with prayers of victory and vengeance. The Celestial Verdict Crusade Fleet, one of the Imperium's proudest armadas, assembled in silent formation around the dying light of a red star. Thousands of space marines stood in cathedral hangars, chanting litanies in perfect unison. Their voices reverberated through metal and faith alike, iron hearts bound by devotion. To them, corruption was a myth of the weak. They were the Emperor's perfection given form, unbreakable and untainted. As the final benediction faded, a new vessel approached. The Omnissiah's Covenant, a Mechanicus transport, emerged from warp translation trailing faint embers. Its hull bore the sigil of Mars, scarred but still radiant. The docking announcement echoed across the ship's box, blessed cargo inbound for genetic sanctification. The Marines knelt as the docking clamps locked. Rites of welcome began, incense burned, censers swung in arcs of smoke, and chaplains recited verses from the Canticles of Purity. When the bay doors opened, the crimson-robed tech priests entered like pilgrims bearing relics. Behind them hovered 6 sealed containers, black, rune-locked, and thrumming faintly with internal heat. GAN catalysts recovered from Martian sanctums, declared the lead adept. Vox distorted but reverent, for the Apothecarian's sacred study. Captain Severin Call nodded solemnly. The Omnissiah blesses this crusade with his fire. His words carried pride, the kind born not of arrogance, but of absolute conviction. None among them questioned why the containers hissed softly, or why the deck beneath them vibrated, as though something inside was alive. Hours passed. The crusade resumed its course toward the Veyron expanse, where Xeno's strongholds awaited annihilation. The Gloria Victis thrummed with disciplined purpose, chant, inspection, devotion, weapon calibration, rest. Routine so precise it bordered on prayer. In the Apothecarian, white-armored medici worked over gene vials, monitoring purity levels. The readings were strange, slightly elevated heat, spontaneous regeneration within dormant samples. Residual Mechanicus modification, said one apothecary, dismissing the anomaly. Blessed contamination. They logged it as stable and sealed the chamber again. Yet as the ship slept, minor irregularities began. Servitors in maintenance halls froze mid-motion, vox speakers sputtering static prayers that looped endlessly. The flesh learns. The steel remembers. Tech adepts found circuits overheating with no discernible source. The ship's atmosphere regulators hummed off rhythm, vibrating faintly like a living lung. In the lower decks, faint condensation gathered on the walls, black, oily, warm. Marines reported coughing within their helmets, mistaking the metallic taste for incense residue from morning rites. In the Apothecarian, Apothecary Marine awoke to a soft alarm. One vial, catalog code 44 Theta, had ruptured spontaneously. Its contents, a viscous black fluid, evaporated within seconds, leaving behind only steam that shimmered in the lumen glow. He leaned closer to the console. The system displayed organic particulate dispersal detected. He frowned, initiating sterilization. Initiate, he began, but the cogitator interrupted. Access denied. System integrity, perfect. Within the ventilation shafts above, something unseen drifted, microscopic spores carried by airflow, spiraling through ducts like dust motes. They clung to armor joints, embedded into suit seals, merged with ceramite plating like dew seeping into stone. The Marines felt nothing, only warmth where there should have been none. By the next watch cycle, oddities multiplied. Servitors began muttering without activation. Data screens displayed corrupted text, purity achieved through assimilation. In the mess hall, a chaplain's rosarius glowed faintly on its own. The tech marine overseeing engine maintenance noticed organic residue forming along the coolant conduits, but dismissed it as rust. The ship's spirit hummed louder, soothing, rhythmic, almost like breathing. Captain Call stood upon the bridge, watching the stars stretch before them like rivers of light. Tomorrow we will deliver the Emperor's justice, he told his officers. The heretic shall know the purity of flame. Behind him, the Mechanicus adepts exchanged brief glances as the sealed cargo continued to vibrate. One whispered a prayer in binary under his breath, uncertain whether it was for blessing or forgiveness. In the apothecary marine knelt beside the remaining vials, studying their glow. The liquid inside shimmered like quicksilver, pulsing faintly with a heartbeat rhythm. He touched the container, and the heat beneath the glass felt alive. "Strange," he murmured. "It shouldn't." The lumen above flickered. A hiss echoed through the vents. Somewhere deep in the ship's spine, a metallic groan reverberated, soft, patient, and hungry. The Gloria Victis, shining spear of the Emperor's will, sailed onward through the stars. Its decks gleamed with ritual purity. Its halls echoed with psalms of devotion. Yet, in its sanctified heart, corruption had already taken root. The ship itself was breathing, and every warrior aboard inhaled the seed of extinction. The planet Obsidian Reach loomed beneath the fleet, a black world of volcanic glass, fractured plains, and ash storms that never slept. Its heretic outposts shimmered with warp-sick light, their twisted spires defying the Emperor's order. The celestial verdict crusade descended like judgment incarnate. Drop pods screamed through the atmosphere, thunder cracking behind them. The first waves hit the surface with divine precision, bolters roaring hymns of cleansing fire. From the mountains, heretic vox chorals faltered and fell silent. For an hour, the war unfolded as it always had, glorious, disciplined, absolute. Captain Severin Call stood within the storm, his armor scorched by plasma yet gleaming under the crimson sky. "Purge the traitors," he ordered, voice amplified across the vox. His astartes advanced through molten trenches, their chants echoing against obsidian cliffs. The ground cracked under ceramite boots. Faith was fire, and they were the Emperor's flame. Then came the first scream. It burst through the vox like feedback, high, wet, wrong. Squad Delta's signal cut to static, then reappeared filled with frantic breathing. "Brother Varan, he turned. Bolter rounds followed, deafening. The feed went dark. Captain Call frowned. "Report," he demanded. Silence. Then another voice, distorted by interference. "The heretics aren't." "No. Emperor preserve us." Static again. A ripple of unease spread through the command net. Then it began everywhere at once. Helm feeds flashed chaotic images, marines convulsing mid-stride, armor splitting from within as something beneath their skin shifted. Helmets fell away, revealing mandibles blooming where mouths had been. Astartes' eyes blackened, their visors flickering before going dead. They moved faster, impossibly faster, their gait no longer human. Squad formations dissolved into madness. "Identify targets," Call shouted, but his vox drowned under screams and gunfire. The corrupted marines struck like predators, leaping from cover with inhuman strength. Bolter fire shredded them, but each kill left behind a spray of hissing acid that melted through ceramite and flesh alike. Loyalists fell, their armor dissolving into steaming pools. "They bleed poison," someone cried. "Maintain distance," but the creatures adapted, vaulting across trenches, ripping through power armor as if tearing parchment. Overhead, the chaos of battle spread to the skies. Dropships collided mid-descent, their pilots screaming prayers that turned to static. From orbit, command watched in disbelief as friendly units tore each other apart. "Enemy confirmation?" the bridge officer asked. "None," replied the Auspex operator. "They're killing each other." Within minutes, Vox networks became incomprehensible, a chorus of overlapping screams, chants, and clicks that no longer sounded human. The hybrid infection had reached its full bloom. One recording captured a chaplain standing over a fallen brother, reciting rites of absolution before realizing the corpse beneath him was still breathing and smiling. Captain Cool regrouped what forces remained, less than 50 men amid thousands. They retreated into the glass ruins of an ancient manufactorum, sealing blast doors behind them. Acid hissed outside, melting the locks. "This is not war," whispered one marine. "This is judgment." Cool activated his helm recorder. To the Crusade command, containment is impossible. The infection spreads through armor interfaces. Our blood, our code, even our prayers are compromised. He paused, voice trembling beneath the roar outside. The Emperor's angels are unmade. Outside, the creatures hunted. They moved on all fours now, their armor warped and fused to their flesh. wings of black resin unfurling from their backs. The heretics who had once defied the Imperium fled into the wastes, firing blindly, unable to comprehend what stalked both them and their enemies. One Chaos Lord, moments before being dragged into the shadows, screamed, "What are you?" The answer came not in words but in sound, a metallic hiss like reverent laughter. Orbital Command authorized exterminatus-level cleansing. Battleships aligned, lances charging. "Fire," ordered the fleet master. The surface erupted in storms of plasma and fire. Cities, mountains, armies, everything burned. From orbit, it was beautiful, an inferno seen through tears of faith. But even as the bombardment raged, sensor readings spiked, movement among debris, silhouettes leaping between dropships, boarding supply pods mid-ascent. They were learning, spreading through the fire meant to end them. When the bombardment ceased, the planet lay silent, its crust cracked, its oceans boiling. The command decks are filled with static. No confirmation of survivors. Then, faintly, one transmission broke through, voice distorted and trembling. "This is Brother Halleck of the 5th. I saw their faces. They are wearing ours now." The Vox died. The fleetmaster bowed his head. "Seal all decks," he whispered. "Quarantine everything." But outside the viewport, faint lights blinked from drifting wreckage, drop pods venting atmosphere, escaping beacons pulsing softly. The infection was already aboard again. The Emperor's wrath had burned the world clean, yet corruption still moved among his angels. The Battle of Obsidian Reach was recorded as a victory in the fleet's archives. None dared change the classification. None dared admit the truth, that humanity's gods of war had become their own monsters. The message reached Inquisitor Kael Dravik while Mars still burned behind him. The Vox crackled with fragmented voices, panic, screaming, static. "This is the Gloria Victis, crew compromised, angels turned, request immediate," then silence. Dravik stared at the data stream, the transmission flickering like a dying candle. He had heard such sounds before at V-Reax 9 in the darkness where the first nightmares had stirred. But this was different. This was organized. This was evolution. He stood alone within his ship's sanctum, armor shadowed by the faint glow of the hololith projection. Across the map, red markers blinked one by one, each representing a vessel now silent or corrupted. The Crusade fleet, his Emperor's crusade, was dying in silence. His adjutant entered quietly, voice trembling. "My lord, shall we dispatch recovery teams?" Dravik didn't look at him. "Recovery?" he said softly. "You cannot recover faith once it has turned on itself." He issued the order without hesitation, though his hands trembled as he sealed the Vox transcript. "By authority of the Ordo Xenos," he declared, "initiate Purge Order Sigma 9. Seal the Obsidian Reach system. No ship leaves. No beacon transmits. Burn everything." His voice grew colder. "Purge the code. Purge the blood." Fleet Command acknowledged with ritual silence. Moments later, the heavens ignited. Orbital strikes rained down upon the remaining battle barges. The Gloria Victis, once the pride of the Crusade, detonated from within, her reactor's explosion painting the void with a brief sunrise. Other vessels followed, their crews singing hymns as the fire consumed them. No rescue pods launched. Dravik had forbidden it. Those who lived were suspect. Those who prayed were infected. Hours later, servitors brought reports of debris still moving, armor fragments drifting on unseen currents, each registering faint biosignatures. "Residual heat?" one officer asked. Magos Biologis shook his head. "No, my lord. Life." The Inquisitor watched the hololith as fragments of shattered ceramite began to cluster, drawn by invisible magnetism, coalescing into patterns no machine could explain. His jaw tightened. Even in death, they adapt. He turned away, recording his final testimony. "We believed purity could cleanse the stars," he said quietly. "We were wrong. Faith itself has become the carrier. They evolve through divinity. The Emperor's wrath gives them form. Every crusade, every prayer, every act of devotion fuels their ascension. We made them in his image, and they answered the call." Outside, the wreckage of the Crusade fleet drifted silently toward the warp's edge. Faint glows shimmered within the debris fields, spores, armor shards, pieces of hybrid flesh wrapped in holy scripture, carried by unseen gravitational tides. The void itself seemed to pulse, drawing them toward its heart. Dravik deactivated the recorder. For a long moment, he stood motionless, listening to the quiet hum of the ship's engines. Then he whispered a final benediction. "Emperor, forgive us. In trying to burn the dark, we taught it to pray. The obsidian reach system vanished from Imperial records. Yet somewhere beyond its ashes, fragments of the fleet continued to drift, small, silent, and very much alive. The fortress monastery of Bastion Erythra rose from red stone like a cathedral carved out of a mountain's heart. Every spire was a hymn to the Emperor, every corridor a vein of faith hammered into steel. When the escape pods from the Celestial Verdict Crusade were recovered, the Blood Ravens greeted them with solemn pride. The pods bore Imperial sigils scorched by plasma, still pulsing faintly with life support beacons. To the chapter, they were relics, gene seed capsules rescued from a martyr fleet. The chaplains declared them sacred inheritance. The apothecaries bowed, whispering prayers of reclamation. Under torchlight and incense, the pods were carried through the Hall of Martyrs toward the reliquary of St. Cryon. There, in the chamber's cold silence, statues of fallen heroes watched as servitors chained the relics to marble plinths. A faint vibration hummed through the floor, a sound too deep for mortal ears. When the chains locked, the vibration stopped, as if the relics had been listening. Brother Captain Alex Veron stood before them, helm removed, his scarred face lit by the glow of votive candles. "We are keepers of legacy," he said. "Through their sacrifice, our bloodline endures." The assembled brothers struck their chests in salute. None noticed that the candles nearest the pods bent slightly inward, their flames leaning toward the sealed containers as though drawn by breath. Days passed. The relics remained under constant vigil. Apothecaries noted faint psychic residue, nothing unusual for gene seed sanctums, yet the readings pulsed with rhythm, like a heartbeat measured in thoughts. Librarian Thasiel, meditating in the reliquary's shadow, heard it more clearly than the others. "It whispers," he told the captain, "not in the warp, but beneath it. A hymn beneath the hymn." Alex dismissed the report. "Echoes of battle trauma. The relics come from war. So do we." That night, the reliquary lights dimmed. The voxalters stuttered mid-litany. Servitors reported energy fluctuations in the incubation vaults. Temperature rising. Pressure anomalous. The apothecaries recalibrated cooling systems, yet the readings persisted, gene seed vials swelling as if breathing. When dawn came, one incubator surface was slick with condensation that glistened black under lumen light. The tech marine overseeing the chamber wiped it away and frowned. "Lubricant leak," he muttered. Unaware, the smear on his gauntlet twitched before drying to ash. Elsewhere, the brothers dreamed. Initiate spoke of visions shared word for word, a cathedral of bones spreading across the stars, each column a spine, each stained glass window an eye. From its altar rose a voice, gentle, familiar, calling them brother. The librarians recorded the dreams as omens of crusade. But when Thasiel entered the chapel the next morning, he froze. The statue of St. Cryon wept from hollow eyes, tears of dark viscous fluid running down its marble cheeks. The scent was sweet and wrong. Chaplains intensified the rites of purification. Fire burned at every altar, cleansing smoke filling the halls until it stung the lungs. Prayers thundered day and night, drowning the whispers that crawled beneath them. Brother Captain Alex walked the corridors restlessly, hearing faint clicks echo through the stone like insects beneath armor. "Warp bleed," he told himself. Nothing more. But the librarian's warnings grew urgent. "The relics sing," Thasiel said. "They are learning our hymns." In the gene vault's mechanical sensors began to register life signs where none should exist. Servo arms froze mid-movement, their machine skirts locking in reverence. One apothecary found his armor sealed around him while he prayed, the servos refusing to disengage. Panic seized him until the suit finally opened on its own, releasing a breath of hot, metallic air that smelled faintly of blood. Beneath the monastery's marble floors, the reliquary roots began to change. Resin veins crept along foundation seams, pulsing faintly with bioluminescence. Power conduits hummed in answer, their frequencies aligning to the same rhythm. When tech marines traced the interference, they found it led not to a circuit core, but to the sealed pods of the Crusade fleet. That night, the reliquary doors shuddered. Lumen globes flared and died. The statue's eyes gleamed briefly as if reflecting unseen lightning. Librarian Thasiel, meditating alone, opened his mind to the whispers and screamed. Across the monastery, Astartes awoke gasping within their armor, hearts racing, instincts sharp as blades. The hive within the relics had touched them, and they had answered. By dawn, the monastery bells tolled out of sequence. No one had pulled the cords, Deep beneath the altars, something vast exhaled, warm, patient, almost loving. The hive mind had found faith. The bells of Bastion Erythra told the hour of devotion, their sound reverberating through marble corridors lined with prayer banners. Captain Alex Veron strode at the head of his command retinue, gauntleted hands clasped behind his back, the heavy cadence of ceramite boots echoing against ancient stone. His brothers followed in silence, their armor polished, their hearts still firm in the Emperor's light. Yet behind the hymns echoing through the vox, there was another rhythm now, an undercurrent soft as breath, resonating from the walls. They entered the reliquary of St. Creon, torches flaring. The sealed pods from the Crusade fleet still sat upon their plinths, chains blackened, surfaces slick with condensation. Alex approached the nearest one, placing his palm upon the metal. It was warm, too warm. "Geneseed relics, you said," he murmured to the attending apothecary. The brother nodded uncertainly. "Sanctified and inert, my lord. Their readings are active, but stable." Alex's brow furrowed. Active and inert do not belong in the same breath. He recited the litany of purity, his voice steady. Yet halfway through the final verse, a tremor ran through him. His breath hitched. Pain, sharp and alien, pierced the base of his skull. He staggered, clutching his head. "Captain?" the apothecary asked, reaching for him. But Alex's armored fingers spasmed, curling as though grasping at invisible threads. The air thickened, heavy with incense and something far less holy. He fell to one knee, growling low through clenched teeth. The others moved to assist, but his body convulsed again, armor groaning under strain. Sinews bulged beneath ceramite, the black carapace beneath his skin rippled like liquid steel. His helm's inner seals clicked shut of their own accord, fusing to his face. Through his vox came not words but distorted hissing, layered with whispers that weren't his own. "Forgive me," he gasped. "Father of mankind, forgive me." Brother Thasiel, the librarian, reached for his mind through the warp, and recoiled instantly. "He's not alone," he whispered. "There's something inside him." Alex's spine arched violently. His backplate split down the middle as veins of black resin surged outward, coating the marble floor in glistening webwork. The reliquary's torches guttered shadows bent toward him. His brothers raised their bolters, hands shaking. "Hold fire," Thasiel shouted. "He is still our captain." But Alex's scream drowned everything. The sound was both prayer and birth cry, echoing through the sanctum like a broken psalm. The floor beneath them shuddered. From the vaulted ceiling above, resin sacks split open, spilling viscous fluid. Figures dropped from the darkness, astartes twisted beyond recognition. Their armor was fused with chitin, pauldrons flaring like carapace ridges, eyes glowing dull amber through translucent helm plates. They moved with terrifying grace, hissing hymns in binary tones. "Brothers," one whispered as it descended, "you taught us to serve." Then it struck, impaling a marine through the chest, acid spraying across the walls in burning arcs. The reliquary became a slaughterhouse of faith. Bolters roared, their holy ammunition tearing through bone and steel alike, yet every impact birthed more horror. Acid blood melting statues, smoke filling the air with the stench of devotion turned rancid. Alex, writhing upon the floor, felt his pulse synchronize with the rhythm in the walls. His vision split, one eye seeing through the haze of incense, the other perceiving pulsing corridors of living resin spreading beneath the monastery. The hive mind was in him now, yet it did not erase his faith. It sanctified it. When his body finally stilled, silence fell. The surviving brothers circled cautiously. Alex knelt before the altar, his armor half absorbed into chitin, his helm reshaped into an elongated skull crowned with resin thorns. His breath was steady, his voice calm. "We serve still," he whispered, his words layered with an inhuman echo. The hybrid marines behind him paused their killing and turned toward him in reverence. The candles that lined the reliquary flickered, then extinguished all at once, plunging the chamber into shadow. Only the faint glow from Alex's altered eyes remained, 2 points of molten gold staring upward toward the statue of St. Creon. Black tears streaked its face once more, glistening like oil. Alex rose, towering over the dead, his movement unnaturally fluid, each motion a prayer written in muscle and mutation. He faced his remaining brothers. "You fear impurity," he said softly, his voice distorted but undeniably him. "But what is purity if not stagnation? The Emperor made us conquer. We are simply continuing his work." One marine raised his bolter, trembling. "You're no longer hymns. Alex smiled, exposing serrated inner jaws. Then perhaps he has changed too. The hybrid marines bowed as he turned toward the altar. Resin crept up the walls, consuming marble, binding relics and corpses alike into a new architecture, living, pulsating, divine. The monastery's great bells began to toll again, not from mortal hands, but from vibration deep within the hive itself. Each note echoed like a heartbeat across Bastion Erythra. Captain Alex Varen, last pure scion of the Blood Ravens, sank to one knee. His prayer was simple, sincere, and monstrous. We still serve. The candles guttered out, and the fortress breathed. The sky above Bastion Erythra was a storm of light and ruin. Plasma detonations painted the heavens crimson as orbital lances cut through the atmosphere, carving scars across continents. The monastery's white spires, once monuments of faith, burned like candles in a hurricane. The angels of the hive had made their stand there, a final chorus of devotion and evolution intertwined. Below the bombardment, the battlefield writhed with living motion, a symphony of flesh, armor, and prayer. Columns of Astra Militarum tanks rumbled through the dust, firing volleys into the crimson haze. Vos officers shouted, coordinates drowned in static. Las fire streaked across the horizon, cutting through resin towers that grew faster than they could be destroyed. Out of those towers emerged the hybrids, towering forms with the grace of Astartes and the ferocity of beasts. Their movements were choreographed to perfection, advancing in unison, chanting litanies as they struck. Perfection through purpose, they intoned through broken vox speakers. Their voices layered, harmonized, almost beautiful. Where bolt of fire met them, acid hissed. Where flame burned, they adapted, exoskeletons thickening, blood clotting midair. The battlefield smelled of ozone, blood, and sanctified decay. A squad of Cadian troopers watched as a hybrid marine, wings of resin unfurled, walked through heavy fire untouched, its every step echoing in perfect rhythm with the imperial hymn still playing through the army's Vox network. One soldier whispered, "They pray while they kill." Moments later, their Vox cut out in static. In orbit, Inquisitor Kale Dravik stood aboard his command vessel, gaze fixed on the planet's surface. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow. Through picked feeds, he watched the hybrid legions overrun armored lines with surgical precision. "They fight as one," murmured his aide. Like a choir, Dravik said nothing. On screen, the resin sprawl had reached the planetary equator, spreading like veins through continents. Cities crumbled beneath it, their architecture consumed into the hive's organic lattice. Dravik's adjutant turned, hesitant. "My lord, do we proceed with exterminatus?" The Inquisitor closed his eyes. "Faith has failed," he whispered. "Only silence remains." He gave the order. From orbit, the bombardment began. Cyclonic torpedoes plunged into the atmosphere, igniting seas, splitting mountains. Bastion Erythra's surface ruptured into molten rivers. Yet the transmissions continued. Through the roar of destruction came voices, steady, serene, unbroken. Perfection through purpose. The last feed showed the inner sanctum of the monastery. The hybrids knelt before the statue of the Emperor, its stone face blackened with ash. They were motionless, heads bowed, hands clasped in reverence. Alex Varen, his form monstrous, wings folded like tattered robes, stood at the center, whispering prayers as fire rained through the ceiling. One by one, the Vox signals faded into static, the chants dissolving into the hum of collapsing frequencies. Minutes later, Bastion Erythra ceased to exist. Nothing remained but dust, drifting in the solar wind. Yet weeks after the purge, Void Watchers reported sightings, figures moving between asteroid shadows, black-winged silhouettes gliding silently across the stars. The Imperium declared the world erased, the heresy extinguished. But in quiet corners of the galaxy, sermons began to change. Phrases once unheard slipped into prayer. Perfection through purpose, faith through evolution. And so the angels of the hive ascended, holy monsters born of devotion, carrying with them the Imperium's final truth, that even in annihilation belief endures. The void between galaxies was silent until the silence began to bleed. From the black horizon beyond the Cadian Gate, where reality bent under its own weight, a single shape emerged. The Sangayeis, thought lost for centuries. Its hull drifted half-consumed, half-reborn, wrapped in streams of warplight like veins of molten glass. Vox beacons flickered along its flanks, whispering prayers backward, hymns of the Emperor twisted into inverted echoes. To the Imperium, it was a ghost. To the warp, it was an invitation. demons sensed it first. The airless gulf trembled as shapes of impossible geometry gathered around the drifting wreck, howling in languages made of pain. They came to feed in despair on echoes of human terror trapped in metal memory. Their claws tore through the ship's broken hull as they descended, eager to claim another corpse of sanity. Inside, the corridors were tomb quiet, lit by pulsing veins of resin that glowed faintly red. The demons prowled, their laughter echoing through steel and shadow. Then they found the chamber. Rows of eggs lay in perfect formation, their surfaces translucent and sweating light. Each pulse from within matched the rhythm of the warp itself, as if syncing to its heartbeat. The demons hesitated, curiosity overtaking hunger. One leaned close, talons brushing the slick surface. The egg shivered and opened. What emerged was no longer flesh alone. The newborn's body glowed faintly, its exoskeleton veined with spectral fire, its eyeless skull haloed by threads of psychic flame. It did not roar, it resonated, vibrating the air around it into harmonic terror. The demon shrieked and struck, its blade arms slicing through the creature's chest. But instead of blood, radiant ichor spilled forth, coiling around the demon like smoke, seeping into its essence. The creature convulsed, screamed, and dissolved into ash. The newborn inhaled the ashes, and its glow deepened. More demons came, drawn by the disturbance. They swarmed, talons rending, maws biting, but the creature multiplied. Every scream birthed another. Each death fed the next. The eggs cracked in sequence, releasing hatchlings whose tails whipped with arcs of lightning, whose inner jaws shimmered with warp fire. They fed not on flesh, but on emotion, each demon they consumed imprinting fear, lust, hatred into their evolving genome. The St. Garasimus became a womb of transcendence. The ship's walls warped, breathing like lungs. The old imperial insignia melted into sigils no human tongue could name. Machinery fused with resin, vox units humming with voices that weren't human or demon. Perfection through purpose, they whispered in reverse. Even the warp began to recoil. Outside, the storm intensified. Warp tides screamed as reality folded in on itself, drawn toward the corrupted cruiser. Every psychic current bent around it like gravity. In distant realms, sorcerers and warp beasts alike felt it, a pull, a hunger, a presence that devoured light without casting shadow. The St. Garasimus drifted deeper into the eye, its wake trailing threads of burning ichor that writhed like serpents. Within, the transformation continued. The Xenomorphs, once creatures of flesh and acid, were becoming something else entirely. Their limbs elongated into fractal shapes, their skulls refracted like prisms. No longer bound by the material, they phased between moments, flickering in and out of existence like thoughts made solid. Their hisses became words, their movements became ritual. They began to build, not hives, but temples. At the ship's heart, one massive cocoon pulsed with a light so blinding it hurt the warp to look upon it. Inside, the silhouette of a queen stirred, her form shifting constantly, sometimes insectoid, sometimes angelic, sometimes pure flame. The demons that remained fell to their knees, not in reverence but in paralysis. They could not kill what they did not believe. When she opened her eyes, the warp screamed. A psychic shockwave rippled outward, scattering demonic hosts for light years. The St. Garasimus vanished into the tempest, leaving behind trails of iridescent residue that glowed with impossible life. What had entered the eye as a biological plague had now become warp-born heresy, creatures without souls, yet born from the souls they devoured. The Chaos Gods, watching from their thrones of madness, stirred uneasily. Something alien now breathed in their domain, something that did not kneel, did not corrupt, and did not die. Reality trembled, unsure which side still owned the dark. The eye of terror churned like a wound that would not close. Its skies were rivers of molten thought, its ground a plain of blood and memory. Upon that infernal horizon, the St. Garasimus drifted, a black sun haloed in warp flame, a cathedral of corrosion. From its hull poured shapes half seen, half imagined, prowling the air as if it were water. They waited, sensing movement across the crimson wastes. The first to arrive were Khorne's Chosen, a warband of the Butcher Legion, crimson and brass, riding chariots pulled by shrieking beasts. They had followed the scent of slaughter, expecting glorious combat. Their leader, Scrathel the Gorwarden, raised his rune-etched axe and bellowed, "Blood for the blood god! The galaxy births new prey." The plains answered with thunder as thousands charged. The ground trembled, yet the ship did not flinch. Its hull exhaled mist, thick, metallic, glimmering with inner light. The first demons who entered it screamed as their armor hissed and sagged. The mist was acid and spirit both, devouring brass and soul alike. Scrathel snarled and leapt forward, cleaving through the vapor. "Face us, cowards!" he roared. They did. From the fog erupted beings of flame and bone. Xenomorphs, but no longer mortal, their carapaces translucent, veins alight with spectral fire. When their jaws opened, warp flames spilled instead of saliva. They moved soundlessly, faster than thought, each motion carving new symbols into the fabric of the realm. Demons swung chain axes that liquefied mid-strike. The creatures tore them apart, talons slicing through matter and madness alike. Every demon's death left behind a streak of crimson vapor that the brood inhaled, absorbing rage like oxygen. Each feeding transformed them. One grew horns of bone that curved like crescents, another sprouted wings of ash, beating storms into the air. Their tails split into tendrils that whispered blasphemies, repeating the warband's own battle cries in distorted mockery. Khorne's spawn fought harder, but for every wound they inflicted, 2 more creatures emerged from the shadows, birthed from the blood mist itself. The plains became a sea of dissolving brass, molten ichor reflecting their silhouettes, angels forged of hunger. Scrathel rallied what remained of his warriors and plunged toward the ship. He reached its ramp, axe blazing, and found himself face-to-face with something that had once been a queen. Her form towered above him, crowned with blades of psychic flame. "We offer no worship," she said, though the sound was not words, but vibration that rattled his bones. Scrathel struck, screaming his god's name. The axe met her chest and melted, the rune for Khorne twisting into an alien sigil before vanishing. The demon froze as her tail coiled around him. "You kill to serve," she whispered through a mouth within a mouth. "We kill to become." Her jaws closed. There was no scream, only implosion. His body folded inward, consumed not by teeth but by hunger itself. Where he vanished, the ground cracked, spilling rivers of molten brass that flowed upward into the sky. The Khorne banner fell, catching fire without fuel. Across the battlefield, the surviving demons faltered. Their bloodlust curdled into fear, a concept foreign to their kind. The brood advanced without rhythm or pause, each step harmonized with the heartbeat of the warp. They mirrored their prey's fury, reflecting rage back upon rage until the demons tore at themselves in madness. When the last of the Butcher Legion fell, the eye itself reacted. The warp screamed, colors inverted, crimson turning to void, sound folding into silence. For the first time, chaos bled. Rivers of psychic energy poured upward, drawn into the St. Gerasimus, feeding the evolving hive. The ship pulsed like a heart, its surface now translucent, revealing countless silhouettes moving within, forms that flickered between angel and monster, soldier and god. A lone demon of Tzinch, watching from afar, recorded the event in living flame before dissolving into laughter and terror. "They know no worship," he cried. "No hunger but their own." His words echoed through the warp for an eternity that lasted seconds, before he too was devoured by radiant darkness. When the storm cleared, the battlefield was gone. In its place floated a single sphere of crystallized ichor, the essence of every demon consumed, now fused into the hive's evolving DNA. The air vibrated with low resonance, like chanting turned inside out. Across the Eye of Terror, demons shuddered in unison, their forms flickering, their gods momentarily silent. Something had eaten the language of sin and made it its own. The feast of the damned was complete. The predators of flesh had learned to eat souls. The warp had never known silence. For 10,000 years it had been a storm of screams, laughter, and prayer, the orchestra of madness eternal. But now the storm has stopped. The airless plains where the feast of the damned had taken place shimmered with afterimages, the echoes of Khorne's slaughterers erased so completely that even their hate was gone. In the distance, where rivers of blood once flowed, there was only glass, polished, reflective, and whispering. From the reflection, something vast moved. A shape like a cathedral of decay lumbered through the fog, bells tolling from within its flesh. It was Lord Gorlak the Unrotted, champion of Nurgle and master of the 7 plagues. His skin oozed incense smoke, his armor alive with fungi that sang. Where he walked, the ground healed, rotting into health, a perverse inversion of life. His one remaining eye stared toward the drifting carcass of the Saint-Gerasimus, now glowing with internal galaxies. Around him, his demon entourage murmured in fear. "They devoured Khorne's legion," one whispered. "And his blessings?" Gorlach asked. "Gone." The blood god's laughter has not been heard since. The Lord's expression was not anger, it was curiosity. "Then even the gods can starve." He plunged a rusted claw into the air, ripping open a rift between worlds. Through it poured voices from every corner of the eye. The whispering intrigues of Tezinte, the silken laughter of Slaanesh, the low growl of Khorne's remaining generals. The rift stabilized into a council of shadows, demons, and warlords, their rivalries older than time itself, now forced into the same space. None spoke first. Even hatred felt inappropriate. Finally, Gorlach broke the silence. "We face extinction." His voice was a cathedral collapsing. "The Devourers do not bow to chaos. They feed upon it." A demon princess of Slaanesh coiled her serpentine body, voice dripping like honey. "You would have us cooperate?" "I would have us exist," Gorlach replied. "Hunger does not distinguish pleasure from pain, faith from blasphemy. It consumes worship itself." 1,000 Suns sorcerer appeared as living fire, eyes blazing through the warp's distortion. "I have seen them in my visions. They learn language through echoes. They mimic the prayers of dying demons." "They are not demons," Gorlach murmured. "They are evolution given will." The council fell silent again. For the first time in eternity, chaos debated survival. The champions of ruin, sworn enemies, embodiments of contradiction, stood united by dread. Then the light around them dimmed. The temperature dropped to absolute zero. Shadows flickered across the warp winds, forming humanoid outlines. Resin gleamed. From within the rift's edge, silhouettes appeared. Not entirely corporeal, not entirely thought. Chitin was laced with warp fire. Halos of spectral bone. They hovered, watching. One of the demons, brave or foolish, hissed, "You come to bargain?" A sound answered. Not a voice, but repetition. The air vibrated with the demon's own words, mimicked perfectly but spoken by something that understood them too well. "You come to bargain," the brood replied. The council shuddered. Their fear was not of death, but of recognition. These creatures had learned the speech of gods. Gorlach lowered his weapon. "They listen," he said. "They learn." His gaze darkened. "And soon, they will lead." The rift flickered. The silhouettes withdrew, melting into smoke, leaving only a whisper behind. "We hunger." When the portal closed, the champions of ruin remained silent. None dared attack. None dared laugh. For the first time, chaos had seen its reflection, and it had teeth. The screams began at dawn. Across the segmentum obscurus, every astropathic choir, from hive cathedrals to void monasteries, convulsed in unison. Their voices, once tuned to the hum of the Astronomicon, broke into a single shriek that echoed through the warp and the material plane alike. Ships dropped out of translation mid-route crews watched as their astropaths bled from the eyes, whispering words no one could understand. Bone wings, living suns, the hive of light. On Cadia Reborn, the Ordo Malleus relay stations captured the first coherent fragments. Psi waveforms unlike any recorded signature pulsed through the void. Not chaos, not psychic, but something adaptive, rewriting frequency with every attempt to measure it. "It's learning our language," one savant murmured before his head imploded, his final thought burned into the data slate. Not infection, reflection. Inquisitor Kael Dravik sat in his sanctum aboard the St. Bastian, staring at the reports spreading across his hololithic displays. Vox intercepts from Ultramar to Armageddon told the same story. Demons fleeing war zones, chaos rituals disrupted mid-incantation, warp storms imploding instead of growing. The unthinkable was happening. The warp itself was being consumed. He turned to his interrogator, pale and shaking. "How many reports?" "Thousands, my lord." "And reliability?" "Absolute." Dravik leaned back, eyes hollow. "Then the brood has reached the gates of reality." The data feeds continued to scroll. Pilgrims aboard a black ship spoke of dreams where the Emperor's angels had faces like beasts. Astarte's librarians collapsed mid-communion, their psychic shields dissolving as they glimpsed worlds burning not by war, but by metamorphosis. And everywhere, the same phrase echoed in vox glitches and corrupted prayers: perfection through purpose. Hours later, the transmission from Terra arrived. It came encrypted, wrapped in inquisitorial sigils of the highest grade. Dravik broke the seal. The message was short, clinical, and impossible. For 7 seconds, the golden throne flickered. He read it twice, then a third time, as if repetition would change the meaning. "Flickered," he said softly. The magos attached to his command nodded. "Confirmed. Power fluctuation in the psychic lattice. Not mechanical. Something external." The words felt obscene. The throne, the one constant in 10,000 years, had moved. For the first time since the Siege of Terror, the Emperor's light had faltered. Dravik stared into the hololithic image of the Astronomy Khan, the psychic beacon that guided all humanity through the void. It pulsed erratically now, no longer steady, as though breathing. "He fears," Dravik whispered. "Even he." Silence filled the chamber. No one dared reply. Reports continued to pour in. Warp readings had spiked beyond known thresholds. Demonic incursions reversed, demons fleeing, not invading. On Vos Prime, a sororitas convent found its relics melting into black resin. On Fenris, rune priests felt the sea freeze mid-chant as visions of skeletal wings swept across the aurora. Entire sectors were going dark, not conquered, not destroyed, but absorbed into something alive. Dravik stood, pacing slowly. "We have faced demons, heretics, xenos, gods. All obey rules of sin, of faith, of fear. But this..." He touched the hololithic field, where readings spiked in patterns too perfect to be random. "This obeys only survival." The chamber of inquiry fell silent again until the youngest acolyte spoke, voice trembling. "If the warp feeds on emotion, and this devours the warp, then it feeds on us." Dravik's gaze hardened. "Correct. And once it learns the shape of our souls, it will wear them." A sudden tremor shook the ship. Psychers in the lower decks screamed as reality itself convulsed. For a heartbeat, the lights dimmed, not from power loss, but from darkness that moved. A whisper filled every vox channel simultaneously, a single phrase echoing across 10 million minds. "We hear you." Then silence. When the lights returned, Dravik's reflection lingered a moment too long in the polished steel of the command dais and smiled without him. He turned to his staff. "Summon the Ordo Majoris, every branch, every creed. We convene on the dead moon of Charon. The Imperium must understand what it faces." One officer hesitated. "Understand, my lord? Or beg?" Dravik looked toward the stars, where warp storms flickered like breathing embers. "Both," he said. "For understanding is the only prayer left to us." The Saint Bastion turned toward the dying light of the Astronomicon. In the warp, echoes of madness rippled outward like waves of sentient thought, reshaping space itself. Somewhere far beyond human sight, the brood stirred and smiled in every tongue at once. The moon Akron the seventh hung dead and black, its surface cracked like the shell of a dying god. Once a shrine world, it had been scoured by exterminators centuries ago. Now only dust and obsidian spires remained, jutting upward like broken fingers clawing for redemption. At its heart stood the Cathedral of Contrition, a structure fused from stone, iron, and petrified warp glass. No light reached its interior. Illumination came only from the glow of the assembled delegates, mortal, immortal, and everything in between. Inquisitor Kale, Dravik stood at the head of the obsidian dais. His armor was black and unadorned, his rosette dimmed as if ashamed of its own authority. Before him, the impossible had gathered. A sister of silence, face hidden behind her silver mask, stood to his right, a void in human shape, her mere presence muting the psychic hum of the room. To his left, Amagos of Mars clicked and whispered in Binharic prayer, every servo trembling with restrained revulsion. Opposite them stood emissaries of chaos, a bloodthirster's avatar, its essence chained inside a mortal vessel of bronze and sinew, loomed in silence, eyes burning with restrained rage. Beside it drifted a robed figure of the Thousand Suns, his armor glowing with runes of containment. Between them, a herald of Nurgle slouched like a rotten king, flies orbiting his skull in lazy reverence. They hated one another. Every breath in the chamber reeked of blasphemy and paradox, yet none dared move. Dravik broke the silence first. His voice was low, steady, stripped of ceremony. 10 millennia, he said. That is how long we've waged war over who owns the corpse of reality. And now reality itself dies, and none of us can claim its bones. The demon avatar's voice was thunder muffled by chains. You presume to speak as equal, mortal? I speak as a survivor, Dravik replied, unflinching. And unless you wish for extinction, you will listen as one. The bloodthirster's lip curled, but it did not strike. The Sister of Silence's nullfield pulsed faintly, her psychic void pressing against the demon's rage like an invisible wall. The thousand-sunned sorcerer tilted his head, curiosity outweighing contempt. You've seen the data then? Dravik nodded. I have seen demons fleeing from their own shadows. I have seen warp storms collapse into silence. And I have seen the throne of man flicker. At that, even the demon stilled. The room's heat dropped. Dravik continued. The enemy we face, it is not God, nor heresy, nor creation. It does not crave worship or fear. It feeds on the act of existing. It consumes both prayer and sin. It devours meaning. The Magos emitted a burst of machine speech. Empirical proof supports this. Adaptation rate exceeds known warp propagation. Hostile biomass demonstrates quantum mimicry of psychic resonance. Plain tongue, Dravik snapped. The Magos paused. It learns. It listens. The herald of Nurgle chuckled wetly. A perfect child of rot. A pity it leaves nothing to decay. Dravik stepped forward, placing his gauntlet upon the obsidian table. Our solution is as blasphemous as our gathering. We will draw it into a trap. A dying sun in the Veharaxis expanse. A collapsing star. Its gravity will collapse the warp's edge. We will bait the brood with psychic resonance, pain, fear, rage, broadcast through sacrificial conduits. The thousand-sun sorcerer smiled faintly. A song of agony to lure the hungry gods. Precisely, Dravik said. We will offer it the thing it desires most, emotion, and when it gathers, we detonate the sun. Reality itself will fold upon gravity well. The bloodthirster leaned closer, chains straining. And what of us, mortals? You think we would die for your Emperor's salvation? Dravik's expression hardened. No, he said quietly, for your own. A silence followed, heavy, suffocating, sacred in its profanity. The Sister of Silence turned her masked gaze toward the demon even in her wordlessness. The meaning was clear. This was not faith. This was survival. One by one, the emissaries nodded. The sorcerer inscribed runes of ascent into the air. The herald of Nurgle spat a glob of ichor that steamed like a signature. The bloodthirster marked the pact with a slash of his claw against the table, molten blood hissing where it struck. Dravik pressed his rosette against the mark, sealing it. Thus we are bound, not by creed, but necessity. The covenant of survival. But as the words echoed through the chamber, the shadows shifted. The light from the warp lanterns bent, forming outlines along the walls, silhouettes that did not belong to anyone present. They twitched, mimicking movements, lips moving soundlessly in perfect sync with Dravik's voice. The Sister of Silence turned sharply, the demon's eyes narrowed. The silhouette smiled. The bloodthirster growled. They are here. Dravik froze. No, he whispered. They were listening. The walls pulsed, the air rippling with faint resonance, not invasion but observation. Something vast, unseen, now understood the concept of negotiation. The light died. When it returned, the council stood in stunned silence. None spoke. None dared breathe. The pact was made. But they all felt it. An unseen presence reciting their words. Somewhere far across the stars. The demonic brood had learned diplomacy. The dying sun of Solis Ecliptes pulsed like a wounded heart. Its corona flared in spasms, shedding rivers of plasma that curved into rings of molten light. Around it hung 1,000 ships, an impossible armada of opposites. Imperial cruisers bearing the Aquila beside Baroque demon vessels wreathed in living brass. The void shimmered with psychic static as the Covenant took formation. On the flagship St. Bastian, Inquisitor Kael Dravik stood before the viewing pane, his reflection split between gold and red light. To his right, the bloodthirster's avatar growled within containment runes to his left. A Sister of Silence recited a prayer that made no sound. They shared no trust, only timing. All fleets, Dravik commanded, initiate resonance. Across the armada, reactors flared. Choirs of bound psychers screamed in perfect unison, their agony translated into frequencies that rippled across dimensions. Every emotion the galaxy could name was offered up: rage, grief, lust, despair, woven into a single pulse of irresistible suffering. The psychic wave struck the dying star, and the sun screamed back. The bait was cast. Moments later, reality thinned. From the edges of the system came movement, blackness folding upon itself, wings of shadow beating soundlessly. The demonic brood arrived. They poured from the warp like an eclipse made flesh, shapes too vast to comprehend. Some glided upon light, others crawled through vacuum, their bodies aflame with stolen souls. The fleets opened fire, macro-cannons and warplances carved radiant scars through the swarm. Each impact birthed more. "Maintain the pattern," Dravik shouted. "Draw them in." The dying sun shuddered. Gravity ripples warped, the void ships buckled as the resonance built. One by one, the brood turned toward the star's core, drawn by the feast of agony. They dived as a single living tide. For a heartbeat, the plan worked. The sun collapsed. Its light imploded inward, dragging the swarm into an abyss of blinding gravity. Chaos and Imperial ships alike were torn apart, their crews vaporized mid-prayer. The void filled with soundless fire, a bloom of divine annihilation. Dravik fell to his knees, eyes seared white. Through the storm he whispered, "It's done." But then the light changed. From the collapsing corona rose a single silhouette, vast, radiant, burning, but unconsumed. It spread translucent wings of plasma, its body a fusion of resin, flame, and gravity itself. Every flare it shed became spores of light drifting outward. The creature opened its jaws, and the dying sun answered. Dravik watched as his vision cleared, the newborn hybrid hovering amid the wreckage. "They learned," he breathed. "They learned entropy." The star extinguished, yet darkness never came. The light remained, fragmented, multiplying, carried across the void by trails of luminous dust. Each mote shimmered with heartbeat rhythm, spreading faster than warp travel, embedding itself in every system it touched. A second dawn bloomed across the galaxy, cold, perfect, unstoppable. Worlds turned their telescopes toward it in awe, not knowing what they witnessed. Priests called it a miracle. Soldiers called it omen. Dravik knew the truth. "Not dawn," he whispered. "Infection." The covenant of survival had brought seconds of peace and birthed eternity's hunger. The world of vigil no longer rotated. Its skies hung still and dim, heavy with ash that glowed faintly from the light of a dying star far beyond its horizon. Once oceans had shimmered beneath its surface, now they were fields of black glass, stretching endlessly, cracked and hollow. The wind carried the sound of dust scraping dust. No birds, no storms, no dawn, only the sigh of a planet remembering sunlight. Beneath the obsidian crust lay Sanctum Terra, the last city of mankind. It was not a city in truth, but a hollowed labyrinth carved into the bones of a volcano long dead. Lumen towers, scavenged from ancient ship cores, flickered dimly above streets of metal and prayer. The air was thick with incense and machine smoke, recycled through filters older than memory. Every wall bore symbols burned into its surface. Prayers, equations, fragments of history, all scrawled by trembling hands desperate to leave proof that humanity had existed. Children ran barefoot through the corridors, their laughter muffled by masks woven from purity seals, relics of the ecclesiarchy, now worn as necklaces for protection. They no longer understood the words written upon them, but they knew they meant hope. At night, they slept beneath murals painted from rust and soot, depictions of the Emperor, the stars, the angels of death. Myths preserved not as faith, but as story. At the city's heart stood the Temple of the Last Flame. Its great brazier, built from the melted remains of a crashed strike cruiser, burned with a fire that never dimmed. The flame's fuel was synthetic, but the devotion was not. Around it gathered the survivors, what remained of humanity's divided faiths. An inquisitor in faded armor recited passages from the Codex Imperialis beside a sororitas survivor who had long since abandoned her vows of purity. A scarred word-bearer stood silently among them, his crimson armor dulled by centuries, his lips moving in prayers once forbidden. And at the back of the hall, a tech priest missing half his face adjusted ancient machinery that hummed like a dying heartbeat. Their creed was no longer of conquest or salvation. It was a remembrance. Above them, the walls of the temple were lined with shelves containing glass cylinders, data crystals, cogitator drives, and parchment scrolls. Collectively, they were known as the Flame Codex, the last record of mankind's rise and fall. The keeper of the codex was an old man few remembered as human anymore. Once he had been Inquisitor Kael Dravik. Now he was something closer to myth. His face was pale and worn, his eyes cybernetic lenses flickering between data streams and tears. Each day he sat before the flame, transcribing the end of worlds in his own trembling hand. He no longer prayed for victory. He prayed for memory. History, he told the children gathered before him, is the soul's last defense against oblivion. So long as we remember, the fire still burns. One child asked, "Will the stars ever return?" Dravik smiled weakly. "Perhaps, but not for us." The city's rhythm was one of quiet endurance. Machines groaned like weary lungs, towers flickered, prayers whispered through corridors like dying winds. Yet beneath this fragile peace, something else moved. For weeks, the tech priest had reported tremors. Faint at first, rhythmic pulses deep below the obsidian crust. He thought them seismic echoes, until the sensors began to register patterns. The frequency was too precise, the intervals too deliberate. "It is not tectonic," he said to Dravik. "It listens before it moves." Dravik frowned, gazing into the display's dim glow. The readings formed shapes, fractal curves, symmetrical, beautiful. He had seen such patterns once before, long ago, on the hull of a ship called the Sankarasimus. "Seal the lower tunnels," he ordered, "and double the flame's watch." The word-bearer's voice rumbled from the shadows. "You know what it is?" "Yes," Dravik said. They remember. That night, the tremors grew stronger. Deep beneath Sanctum Pera, the obsidian floor cracked like the surface of an egg. From within came the faintest glimmer, not fire but light that pulsed like a heartbeat. The children, asleep in the upper vaults, dreamed of wings made of glass and cities reflected in oceans that no longer existed. And as Dravik stood before the flame codex, pen shaking in his withered hand, he wrote the words no archivist of mankind had dared write before. "They have found us again." The flame flickered once, not from wind, but from fear. Night fell without moving shadows on vigil. Sanctum Pera, dim to embers recyclers side the temple of the last flame, glowed with quiet exhaustion. Sleep came like surrender, children first, then soldiers, then the penitent, and finally Kael Dravik. The dream did not approach, it bloomed. He found himself beneath a sky he did not know, where space pulsed in rhythm and, at its center, a star beat like a heart too large for creation. From it unfurled wings of darkness, feathers carved from mirrored bone, shimmering not with light but with memory. Other dreamers appeared beside him, unmoving yet awake, a Sororita survivor gripping her rusted aquila, a word-bearer bowed as if before a beloved heresy, masked children gazing with the calm of prophecy. They shared the same vision, each heartbeat of the star sending waves of emotion through them. Sorrow, triumph, terror. The silence of the wings pressed into their ears like speech. "You kept our names alive. We tasted them." Their breath caught as if truth itself had inhaled. Visions ripped through Dravik's mind. Angels forged from bone circled sons of blood. Halos woven from the prayers of extinct worlds. Terror stood as a skull of gold and glass, the throne empty, cables hanging like desiccated veins. He tasted salt from oceans turned to mirrors and heard the laughter of children layered over cannon thunder. Memory had become a net, and the brood wore it like a crown. He awoke kneeling before the flame codex, ink bleeding across a page in words his hand had not written. "We are remembered, therefore we are." He summoned the tech priest, cables trailing like metal rosaries. Together they reviewed dream reports from across Sanctum Pera, identical in rhythm, varied only in imagery. Frequency analyzes behaved like living organisms, adaptive, recursive, aware. "Their hive has no soul," the priest rasped, "so it eats ours, not the flesh, but the narrative. Meaning is caloric." Dravik whispered, plain tongue. The reply came, trembling. "Every retelling feeds them, forgetting starves them, but forgetting erases us." Between them lay the paradox, salvation and invitation carved into the same altar. The debate became liturgy. The word bearer preached silence, to carry memory like an unlit candle, held, not shown. The Sororitas argued that testimony itself was holy, even if it killed them. Their words clashed like blades, neither victorious. That night, the dreams returned stronger. Some woke screaming, others woke smiling as if reunited with their dead. Children hummed in their sleep, the note matching the tremor in Vigil's stone. Above, the glass planes shimmered with faint aurora, as if the world itself had begun to remember. Meteors stitched white scars across the motionless sky, curving toward ancient exhaust vents. Dravik and the tech priest watched from the observatory as the first stones landed, cracking without sound. Inside were not rocks but eggs of vitrified plasma, translucent and pulsing. Each throb matched the star beat. Pressure sensors spiked in prayer rhythm. Vox alters whispered fragments of the shared dream. "It's reading us," murmured the priest. "No," Dravik said, eyes hollow. "It's rereading us until the story makes sense to itself." The city's lights dimmed as if bowing. They descended into the tunnels with a lantern and an argument. The chamber of impact was a cathedral of reflections. Within the glassy shell floated glyphs shaped from light, rearranging themselves into Dravik's own handwriting as he approached. "It's reading me back," he breathed. The priest's voice broke. "We must extinguish the flame, the codex, the chants, the names, a fast from self." Dravik shook his head. "And become beasts? Survival without witness is the extinction of meaning." "Better unremembered than consumed," the priest replied. The egg cracked. Heat rolled through the room, gentle yet absolute. From the fissure came a sound like 1,000 pages turning, each sharp enough to cut. It braided into a chorus, not hostile, not kind, only hungry. Dravik froze. The sound wound through every relic of childhood and war, every psalm and oath. He thought of the children's purity seals worn as comfort and realized the brood had followed those stories home. It had grafted its womb to nostalgia. Above them, Sanctimpera trembled, alarms whispered instead of screamed, as if unwilling to wake a god. Dravik looked up, feeling the vibrations ripple through his bones. Not destruction, but recognition. The flame in the temple fluttered, though no wind touched it. The city listened. He tasted ash and made a decision. "Prepare," he said quietly, voice cracking. "The last rites of forgetting." Outside, meteors continued to fall, and each impact echoed like a heartbeat returning to the dark. The end came without panic. It came as a ritual. In the cavernous temple of the last flame, the survivors of Vigil gathered, hundreds where once there had been billions. The fire still burned, though the air itself trembled with the approach of something vast and radiant beyond the stone. The walls shook as molten dust fell like red snow. Each tremor was a heartbeat of the approaching brood, wings of living light, their descent a sermon written in entropy. At the center stood Kale Dravik, ancient and skeletal, his armor fused with tubes and prayer wires. Before him pulsed the Flame Codex, its cylinders and data scrolls stacked like bones of civilization. The tech priest whispered binary hymns as machinery groaned awake, a device built from the ruins of Martian reactors and fragments of starship hearts. It was no ordinary weapon. At its core burned a sun captured and folded, the Sol Codex engine, humanity's final creation. Dravik turned to his followers. "They feed on what we remember," he said, voice soft but carrying like judgment. "Then let us give them more than they can ever consume." The sororitas bowed, pressing her cracked aquila to her chest. The word-bearer smiled faintly, murmuring a prayer to gods that had long since fled. Children stood among them, eyes bright, holding candles made from melted data crystals. Every light was a memory, every flame a confession. "Upload everything," Dravik ordered. "All names, all wars, all songs. Let the codex burn with the weight of what we were." The tech priest hesitated. "This will erase us." "Yes," Dravik whispered. "That is mercy." Above them, the ceiling split. Rivers of molten light poured downward. The brood had arrived, a descending aurora of wings and faces that shimmered like recollections of love twisted into hunger. They did not roar, they remembered aloud. The sound was the echo of humanity itself, played backward. Dravik raised his hand. "Ignite." The Suncore bomb bloomed. No fire, no shockwave, just story. Light expanded through the tunnels, carrying words instead of heat. 1,billion voices, poets, soldiers, martyrs, heretics, screamed their histories into the void, flooding every psychic channel. The brood convulsed as the torrent struck, overwhelmed by the infinite banquet of remembrance. Their wings disintegrated into dust, their brilliance devoured by the very meaning they craved. Sanctimpera vanished in a radiance without heat. The world's crust melted into smooth glass once more. And for the first time in an age, the galaxy fell silent. Only one thing remained. Far beyond Vigil's orbit, drifting through cooling plasma, a fragment of code pulsed faintly, a single data crystal from the Flame Codex. It spun slowly, its surface reflecting the memory of fire. Through static and darkness, it transmitted a final word into the endless night. Hope. Time forgot how to count. In the emptiness left behind, silence stretched like an ocean without shore. The stars that had screamed in their dying finally cooled, their ashes drawn together by patient gravity. The warp, once wild with hunger and madness, dulled to a soft hum. A cosmic scar turned lullaby. Radiation from the flame codex's final detonation drifted like pollen through nebulae, seeding particles of code and instinct into newborn suns. Light returned, tentative and golden, gliding through dust once blackened by war. In this gentler universe, no prayers were spoken, yet something sacred endured. Fragments of humanity, genetic, digital, mythic, scattered across time and recombined in the chemistry of chance. On the world that would later be named Aurelia, oceans of molten crystal shimmered under twin moons. Tides glowed softly, phosphorescent with living dust. From those waters rose the first stirrings of life since the end, forms so fragile they would have died in any other age. But here, the universe was kind again. Beneath translucent waves, membranes pulsed and split. Cells wove themselves into filaments of light, their DNA whispering languages older than any god. Where humanity had once written machine code and xenomorphs had etched survival into bone, now both patterns coexisted, biological and algorithmic, instinct and reflection. In the currents, intelligence was no longer hunted, it was nurtured. Above, the sky sang faintly, not words, but resonance. The background hum of the cosmos carried a hidden chord, a remnant of the psychic shockwave that had once devoured creation. Those who would later evolve might call it music. In truth, it was memory. On the continent of obsidian plains, the first multicellular creatures drifted ashore. Their bodies shimmered between matter and light, translucent and aware. They had no eyes, yet they perceived everything through vibration. They feared nothing, for the concept of fear had not yet been rediscovered. When meteors streaked across the sky, they did not cower, they reached upward, curious. Aurelia's air was sweet, unburdened by smoke or prayer. Every dawn painted the horizon in mirrored gold. From mountaintops carved by ancient tides, rivers descended in threads of glowing mist, each drop carrying microscopic echoes of data, the forgotten code of vigil, the digital DNA of the brood. Fragments of human story burned into radiation and rain. The planet breathed with inherited memory it could not yet understand. In the deep ocean trenches, something older waited. Filaments of bioluminescent matter wove themselves into elegant spirals, humming faintly in patterns that mirrored thought. Evolution, curious as always, tested symmetry, balance, intention. A shape took form, not monstrous, not divine, simply aware. It opened like a flower. When lightning struck the sea, the spark of awareness ignited across millions of neural threads. At that moment, the universe dreamed again. No voices commanded it, no god sculpted it. The memory of worship had perished with humanity. But within the data ashes of the flame codex, embedded in molecules now swimming through Aurelia's tides, lingered a single directive: remember kindly. And so, in the silence between pulses, the new world remembered, not names or wars, but warmth, connection, the flicker of fire in dark halls. From extinction, empathy was reborn. Yet peace carried its own omen. Beneath the crystalline seabed, light shifted oddly, rhythm repeating, too perfect to be natural. The ancient code stirred, weaving patterns like heartbeat signatures. In the coral of data and bone, something graceful moved, not predator, not prey, but curiosity given flesh. It traced the motion of stars reflected on the waves, its limbs delicate, its mind wordless. The creature paused, feeling vibration ripple through the tide, a whisper in a language it had never learned. Remember us kindly. The whisper faded, leaving stillness, but for an instant the creature hesitated, as though on the verge of understanding. Then it swam upward toward the shimmering surface, chasing the first dawn of a universe born clean, unaware that even innocence carries memory in its blood. Evolution never truly forgets. Aurelia's dawn came in music, not light. The twin moons dipped below the horizon as the world's atmosphere vibrated with harmonic resonance. A chorus of frequencies carried on wind and wave. From that harmony rose the voices of a civilization unlike any before it, built not upon conquest or faith, but memory transformed into instinct. Across the coral plains, crystalline cities bloomed like reflections of constellations fallen to the sea. Their towers were grown, not built, lattices of living minerals intertwined with bioluminescent tissue. Within their translucent walls, beings of equal translucence moved with unhurried grace. They had no need for language as humanity once knew it. They felt meaning through vibration, tone, and shared resonance. Every gesture carried music, every silence was deliberate. They were called, by the few among them who pondered identity, the children of ash and light. Their skin glowed faintly beneath sunlight, veins pulsing with liquid crystal. Beneath their transparent chests, hearts shimmered like molten amber. Their limbs were long, elegant, flexible, capable of both sculpting art from mineral dust and enduring the depths of Aurelia's crushing oceans. In them lived the balance of two legacies: human curiosity and xenomorph precision. They were strong but not violent, adaptive but not ruthless. Their hands built, their minds sang. And yet, within the very structure of their being, old instincts stirred like embers beneath glass. When lightning flashed or thunder cracked, they turned their faces skyward in silent awe, and beneath the awe, something unspoken: fear. It was not the fear of death, nor of pain. It was an ancestral memory, a faint echo of running from shadows that hunted light. None of them knew why their pulse quickened when night fell, why they dreamed of wings made of fire and stars that screamed. The elders called it the inheritance of heat, a superstition, an old data reflex buried in their cells. Yet when they gathered around the flame, that fear dissolved into reverence. Fire fascinated them. Across every city, from the domes of Kalan to the reefs of Lerath, stood shrines of eternal flame, enclosed within crystal spheres. The children would sit before them for hours, basking in their warmth, listening to the low hum emitted by the burning gas. To them, fire was not destruction, it was memory made visible. Some said the flame sang when one listened long enough, whispering fragments of forgotten stories in tones no ear could catch. Their scholars, or rather, their harmonic historians, dedicated entire lifetimes to decoding those whispers. Using resonance amplification, they believed they could hear the universe's buried symphony. What they found were pulses repeating across cosmic time, not random, not natural. Patterns, names, ghost echoes of words. They did not understand them, not truly, but they recorded them faithfully. Dravik.flame.boy. Among the children, philosophical schools arose to interpret the meaning of these fragments. Some taught that the universe had once birthed dark fathers, beings of flesh and sorrow who had burned themselves to keep the void from devouring thought. Others claimed the dark fathers were myth, symbols of entropy's final resistance. The most daring whispered that they were the children's creators, that every harmonic note they sang was a fragment of those voices, echoing through genetic memory. Still, they did not build empires. They built gardens. Their society revolved around symbiosis, art as nourishment, remembrance as creation. Crystals bent sunlight into murals across their plazas, each color representing emotional harmonics, each tone painting their shared past. No wars scarred their history, no greed bent their science. For the first time in any age, intelligence existed without dominion. And yet, not all among them were content with serenity. In the western city of Lerath, a young philosopher named Ian stood often at the edge of the sea, staring at the stars with a strange melancholy. His peers found him odd, quiet in his harmonics, dissonant in tone. "Why do you grieve for what you do not remember?" they asked. Ian's answer came as a whisper carried through resonance, a tone that rippled across the waves, because even light carries the shape of its shadow. He spent years studying the flame shrines, his reflection mirrored in the glass spheres that housed eternal fire. He claimed to hear emotion within the crackle, not randomness but intent. The elders dismissed it as mythic longing, but Ian persisted. "These flames are not gods," he said. "They are messages, reminders left by those who could not bear to vanish completely." One evening, during the convergence of twin moons, Ian gathered a small circle of students around the grand flame of Kalan. Its light refracted through the crystal domes, scattering across their faces. "The myths say our ancestors burned themselves to save creation," he said softly. "If that is true, then perhaps we are what survived their love, not their fear." The others listened in silence. For a brief moment, the fire's hum shifted, a faint note rising above the natural frequency, carrying the ghost of a heartbeat. None spoke of it, but all felt it. Something vast, ancient, and gentle moved in the distance, unseen yet aware. Ian turned his gaze upward. The stars shimmered like memories waiting to be sung. "We are the children of ash and light," he whispered. "Let us be worthy of both." Far above Aurelia, invisible in the clean night sky, faint ghost lights drifted, remnants of the demonic brood long since dissolved into plasma and thought. They did not hunt, they only watched. And though they no longer possessed mouths or minds, Something within their glow almost resembled reverence. Beyond the reach of suns, where light thinks, they drift. Once they were terror incarnate, the demonic brood, the predators of gods. Now they are nothing so crude as flesh or hunger. Their forms shimmer like veils of aurora stretched across the void, each one a ghost of motion and memory. Where they pass, the stars brighten for a heartbeat, as though recognizing old companions. They remember everything. In their silence lies the residue of humanity's final scream, the echo of the brood's last evolution, the resonance of fire turned into song. No longer driven by instinct, they move through galaxies like quiet custodians, their presence shaping the birth of nebulae and the pulse of newborn suns. Each spectral shape carries within it fragments of what once was. The faces of warriors, the hymns of faith, the fury of extinction, and the fragile kindness that followed. One drifts toward a small yellow star, its glow soft and young. Around it, worlds swirl in cradle motion, still cooling, still innocent. The being halts. It kneels, not out of worship, but remembrance. From its luminous core emerges a sphere of light, trembling, pulsing with sound. The brood releases it into the star's gravity well. The sound is laughter. Faint, human, pure, a child's laughter recorded millennia ago on ancient Terra, stored within data fragments buried in genetic code, carried across time by evolution itself. It ripples through the vacuum, impossible yet real, resonating across magnetic fields until it fades into the cosmic background. For an instant, the universe seems to pause, listening. The other specters turn their faces, or the memory of faces, toward the sound. Through them passes a current of recognition. The hunger that once defined them has long since turned into longing, and longing into understanding. Perfection sought to consume, the narrator's voice murmurs, soft as the space between heartbeats. Humanity sought to endure. In the end, both learn to evolve. And so they remain, not as masters or monsters, but as witnesses. Every act of creation is now accompanied by their invisible vigil, their light passing unnoticed between galaxies, brushing across the atmospheres of new worlds, blessing them in silence. They do not interfere. They do not teach. They simply watch, ensuring that the cosmos never again forgets the cost of awareness. From a distance, their trails of light resemble constellations, myth reborn as astronomy. Somewhere, on Aurelia, the children of ash and light lift their translucent faces toward the night, tracing those patterns without knowing they are being traced back. The camera pulls outward, past Aurelia's twin moons, past the spiral arms of its galaxy, past clusters where stars form like sparks from a divine forge. Everywhere, the faint hum persists, the rhythm of remembrance, the breath of something vast and peaceful. The universe, once a graveyard, now breathes. Not in war, not in worship, but in quiet understanding. Every pulse of energy, every whisper of gravity carries the same message written across the eternity of night: we were here. And somewhere, far beyond the last horizon, a new sun rises, its light folding gently over the dark as the credits fade across its surface, shimmering like memory itself.